The hunger was a living thing inside Leo, gnawing at his ribs with teeth of its own. 3 days since his last proper meal, a handful of grubs dug from beneath a collapsed wall, and now his stomach had progressed beyond mere emptiness into a hollow, aching void that seemed to swallow his thoughts whole. He crouched in the shadow of what had once been a bank, its marble facade now cracked and stained with dark streaks that might have been rust or old blood. The air smelled of ozone and decay, a familiar cocktail in this ruined quarter of the city. From his vantage point behind a fallen column, Leo watched the battle unfold 2 blocks away. Human soldiers in patchwork armor moved with the grim efficiency of professionals, their movements coordinated even as they retreated. They were firing energy rifles that left faint tracer lines in the twilight air, the shots impacting against something massive that Leo could only glimpse in fragments between buildings. A flash of obsidian black carapace. The sweep of a wing that seemed to drink the fading light. The ground trembled with each impact. Leo's fingers tightened around the rusted pipe he carried as a weapon. His knuckles were white, the skin stretched taut over bone. He'd been scavenging in this sector when the fighting started, drawn by rumors of untouched supply caches in the old financial district. Now he was trapped, pinned between the retreating human line and whatever they were fighting. His options were starvation or becoming collateral damage. A roar split the air, so deep it vibrated in Leo's teeth. The soldiers redoubled their fire, their shouted commands carrying on the wind. Fall back. Secondary position. One of them went down, his armor smoking where a black spike had punched through his chest. The others didn't pause to retrieve him. They were professionals, not heroes. In this world, retrieving the dead was a luxury few could afford. Leo's eyes tracked the fallen soldier's equipment, a functional sidearm still holstered at his hip, a pack that might contain rations. The hunger twisted inside him, a physical pain that overrode caution. He could almost taste the synthetic protein bars the military issued, the chalky texture that meant survival for another day. But between him and that pack lay 200 meters of open ground and whatever the soldiers were fighting. Then he saw it. The thing emerged from behind a collapsed office tower, and for a moment Leo's brain refused to process what his eyes were showing him. It stood 3 stories tall, a nightmare of angles and darkness. Its body was armored in interlocking plates of black chitin that gleamed with an oily sheen. 4 multi-jointed legs supported a torso that tapered into a humanoid upper body, complete with arms that ended in blades rather than hands. Its head was crowned with horns that curved like scythes, and where a face should have been, there was only a single vertical slit that glowed with crimson light. The Demon Lord. The name surfaced from half-remembered rumors traded in scavenger camps. Creatures that had emerged during the collapse, entities of such power that even military units avoided direct engagement. It was wounded. Leo could see that now. Gaps showed in its armor where energy fire had burned through, revealing pulsing flesh beneath. One of its blade arms hung limp, the edge notched and cracked. It moved with a staggering gait, each step shaking rubble from nearby buildings. The soldiers were falling back in good order, laying down suppressing fire as they retreated to a pre-established secondary position. They weren't trying to kill it, just drive it off, buy time for evacuation. The Demon Lord took another step forward, then its leg buckled. The crimson light in its facial slit flickered, dimmed. It made a sound that wasn't a roar but a shuddering exhalation, like a great bellows emptying. Then it collapsed, its weight crashing through the pavement in a spray of concrete and rebar. The impact sent a shockwave through the ground that reached Leo's hiding place, making dust sift down from the broken ceiling above him. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. The soldiers hesitated at the edge of the square, their weapons trained on a fallen entity. One of them, a woman with sergeant's markings on her armor, gestured sharply. Confirm termination. Loot protocol. 2 soldiers broke from the formation, advancing cautiously toward the massive corpse. The others maintained covering positions, their eyes scanning the surrounding ruins for threats. Leo's mind raced. The Demon Lord was dead or dying. The soldiers would strip it of anything valuable, organs, armor fragments, genetic samples. The military paid well for monster parts, especially from high-tier entities. They'd be occupied for minutes at least, maybe longer if the corpse was difficult to process. And between him and that corpse lay only open ground and the distraction of the looting team. The hunger decided for him. He moved without conscious thought, his body acting on instincts honed by years of surviving in the ruins. He kept low, using the rubble for cover, his footsteps silent on the broken pavement. The pipe felt useless in his hand now. What good was rusted metal against something that could shrug off energy rifles? He dropped it without a second thought. Speed was everything. The two soldiers reached the demon lord's body. One of them produced a scanner, running it over the chitinous plates. The other kept watch, his rifle sweeping the area. They were professionals, but they were also tired, their attention focused on the prize before them. They didn't see the shadow that slipped from behind a collapsed bus, didn't hear the faint scrape of boots on concrete as Leo crossed the final 20 meters. The demon lord's chest rose and fell in shallow, shuddering breaths. It wasn't dead yet, but close enough that the soldiers had lowered their guard. The scanner beeped, and the soldier operating it called back to the sergeant. Bio signs fading. Estimated time to expiration, 90 seconds. Heart still shows activity. Heart. The word echoed in Leo's mind. In scavenger lore, the hearts of powerful monsters held concentrated energy, genetic potential. Some said eating them could grant temporary boosts, glimpses of the creature's abilities. Most who tried died horribly, their bodies rejecting the foreign biology. But Leo was past caring. The hunger was a fire in his gut, and before him lay a feast that could end it forever. He reached the body just as the soldiers began discussing extraction techniques. They were 20 feet away, their backs to him as they examined a cracked section of carapace. The demon lord's chest was a landscape of broken armor and exposed flesh. Between two plates, Leo saw something pulsing, a dark, muscular organ that beat with a slow, stubborn rhythm. The heart. There was no time for tools, no time for careful extraction. Leo dropped to his knees, his hands finding the gap in the armor. The flesh was hot to the touch, almost burning. He could feel the life still in it, the final stubborn beats of something that had ruled this sector until moments ago. He didn't think about what he was doing. He didn't think about the consequences, the stories of scavengers who tried similar things and ended up as twisted, screaming things in the dark. He thought only of the hunger, and of survival. He bit down. His teeth met resistance, tough muscle, fibrous tissue. He bit harder, tearing with a desperation that shocked even him. The taste flooded his mouth, copper and ozone and something else, something ancient and wrong. The heart beat once against his lips, a final contraction, then went still. He swallowed, the chunk of flesh tearing loose as he pulled back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. It started as a warmth in his stomach, but within seconds it became a fire that raced through his veins. Leo gasped, his hands flying to his abdomen. The warmth spread upward, into his chest, down his limbs, until every cell in his body seemed to vibrate with newfound energy. His vision sharpened, he could see individual dust motes drifting in the air, could count the scratches on the soldier's armor 20 feet away. Sounds clarified, the hum of the scanner, the sergeant's muttered commands, the distant cry of a carrion bird. And then the voice. It wasn't a sound heard with ears, but a presence that unfolded in his mind like a poisonous flower. Words formed from concepts rather than language, consumption. Assimilation. Evolution. The Soul Leader's Cursed Maw has awakened. Genetic potential absorbed. Level 1 achieved. Leo staggered to his feet. The hunger was gone, replaced by a surging vitality that made him feel invincible. He could run for miles, fight for hours. The exhaustion of 3 days without food had vanished as if it had never existed. He looked at his hands, they were the same, no claws, no scales. Just human hands, now trembling with energy rather than weakness. Hey! The shout cut through his daze. One of the soldiers had turned, had seen him standing by the demon lord's chest. The man's rifle came up. Scavenger. Step away from the asset. Leo didn't wait. He turned and ran, his legs pumping with strength he hadn't possessed minutes before. He cleared a fallen beam in a single bound, his feet finding purchase on rubble that should have sent him sprawling. Shouts followed him, then the crack of rifle fire. Energy bolts sizzled past, one close enough that he felt the heat on his neck. He didn't look back. He wove between broken buildings, using the ruins as cover, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. He'd done it. He'd eaten the heart of a demon lord and survived. More than survived, he felt powerful. The voice in his head had said, Level 1. What did that mean? What was the Soul Leader's Cursed Maw? His left hand began to tingle. At first he thought it was just adrenaline, the aftermath of the chase. But the tingling intensified, becoming a prickling sensation that spread from his wrist to his fingertips. He glanced down as he ran, and what he saw made him stumble. His fingers were elongating. The bones shifted under the skin, stretching with a series of audible pops. The skin itself darkened, taking on a gray, leathery texture. Nails thickened, curled, sharpened into points. Leo watched in horror as his hand twisted, the fingers becoming too long, too thin, ending in bony claws that gleamed in the fading light. He could still feel them, they were his fingers, but alien, wrong. When he flexed them, the claws clicked together with a sound like stones tapping. He stopped running, staring at his mutated hand. The energy still coursed through him, but now it felt tainted, dangerous. This was the cost. This was what the voice had meant by Cursed Maw. From behind him, carried on the wind, came the shouts of soldiers. They'd regrouped, were coming after him. Mutant. He's a freaking mutant. Don't let him get away. Leo looked at his claw hand, then back toward the sounds of pursuit. The sun had dipped below the ruins, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for him with fingers of their own. Somewhere in the distance, a monster howled, a different sound than the demon lord's roar, but no less hungry. He was no longer just a scavenger. He was something else now. And everything in this broken world would want him dead for it. The ruins stretched before Leo like a skeletal hand clawing at the sky. Jagged concrete teeth gnawed at the horizon, their edges softened by the relentless dust that coated everything. Leo stumbled through the debris, his left hand a grotesque weight at the end of his arm. The bony claws that had erupted from his fingers during his flight from the soldiers scraped against broken asphalt with every step, leaving faint white scratches in the gray surface. Each scrape sent a vibration up his arm, a constant reminder that his body was no longer entirely his own. He glanced back toward the distant sounds of military activity, the occasional shouted command, the rumble of engines. They hadn't followed him into this deeper section of the ruined city, not yet. But they would. The sergeant's cold voice echoed in his memory, report any mutations immediately. Mara would have already told them about the freak who ate a demon heart. His own scavenger party had turned on him the moment his fingers began to lengthen and harden. Leo's right hand pressed against a crumbling wall for support. The contrast between his normal flesh and the mutated claw was stark. The claws were bone-white, slightly curved like sickles, and hard as stone. When he flexed them, they moved with an unnatural precision, responding to his thoughts but feeling alien, like controlling a tool rather than part of his body. The skin around their base had thickened into a leathery sheath, protecting the joints where bone met what remained of his human hand. A sudden skittering sound made him freeze. His breath caught in his throat. From a collapsed storefront ahead, shadows moved. Not human shadows, these were low to the ground, quick, and many-legged. Leo backed against the wall, his claw hand raised instinctively. The movement felt awkward, unbalanced. He was right-handed, but now his left was the weapon. They emerged into the dusty light, dog-sized insects with segmented bodies the color of rust and dried blood. Their carapaces clicked as they moved, 6 legs propelling them with unnerving speed. Mandibles like serrated shears opened and closed with audible snaps. There were 5 of them, their compound eyes reflecting the hazy sunlight in fractured patterns. One scuttled forward, testing. Leo swung his claw hand. The motion was clumsy, too wide. The bony claws whistled through empty air as the insect darted back. Another came from the side, mandibles aiming for his leg. This time, Leo didn't think, he reacted. His claw hand came down in a chopping motion, and to his shock, it sheared through the insect's front leg with a crisp crunch. The limb fell to the ground, twitching. The insect shrieked, a high-pitched sound that made Leo's teeth ache. The others surged forward as one. Panic tightened his chest. He swung wildly, claws catching on carapace, scraping, sometimes piercing. One insect latched onto his right calf, mandibles sinking deep. Pain exploded up his leg, hot and immediate. Leo roared, bringing his claw hand down on the creature's head. This time, the claws punched through with surprising force, splitting the chitin like rotten wood. Ichor sprayed, thick and foul-smelling. He kicked the dead insect away, but the damage was done. Blood welled from the wound on his calf, soaking through his ragged pants. 2 more insects came at him simultaneously. Leo dropped to a crouch, his claw hands sweeping in a wide arc. The enhanced strength he'd felt earlier returned, the claws tore through both insects' midsections, spilling their insides across the rubble. The remaining 2 hesitated, their clicking growing more frantic. Leo didn't wait. He lunged, his movements growing more coordinated as adrenaline and desperation merged. His claw hand became an extension of his will rather than a foreign appendage. He impaled one insect through its thorax, lifted it off the ground, and slammed it against a concrete slab. The carapace shattered. The last insect turned to flee, but Leo was on it in 3 strides. His claws closed around its back, and he squeezed until something cracked. Silence returned, broken only by Leo's ragged breathing. He slumped against a broken pillar, his body trembling. The wound on his calf throbbed with each heartbeat. Blood dripped steadily, forming a small dark pool in the dust. He needed to stop the bleeding, but he had no bandages, no medicine. His stomach growled, a hollow ache that competed with the pain. His eyes fell on the dead insects. Their bodies lay scattered, ichor slowly seeping into the ground. The Soul Leader's Cursed Maw, that's what the power had called itself when it awakened. It required consumption. Organic matter. Genetic potential. The words echoed in his mind like a curse and a promise. Leo crawled to the nearest intact insect corpse. The thought of eating it made his stomach churn. The carapace was hard, the insides likely gelatinous and bitter. But the alternative was bleeding out in these ruins, waiting for the soldiers or something worse to find him. He positioned his claw hand over the insect's body. The bony claws were surprisingly precise tools. He worked them between segments of carapace, prying until he exposed the soft tissue beneath. It was pale gray, veined with darker threads, and smelled of ammonia and decay. Leo closed his eyes, took a breath that did nothing to steady him, and brought a handful to his mouth. The taste was worse than he imagined, acrid, slimy, with an undertone of something metallic. He gagged, nearly vomiting, but forced himself to swallow. The substance slid down his throat like cold mucus. He took another handful, then another, eating mechanically, focusing on the necessity rather than the revulsion. As he consumed the last of the insect's internal tissues, warmth spread through his stomach. It wasn't the comforting warmth of food, this was different, sharper, like electricity coursing through his veins. His vision blurred at the edges. A notification appeared in his mind, not as words but as a knowing. Level 2 achieved. Then the pain hit. It started behind his eyes, a pressure building until he thought his skull would crack. Leo cried out, clutching his head with both hands, the normal right and the clawed left. The world dissolved into white agony. When it receded seconds later, everything had changed. The ruins were still there, but now they glowed. Not with light, but with heat. The concrete slabs radiated a faint warmth from the day's sun, showing as muted oranges and yellows in his vision. The dead insects were cooling rapidly, their heat signatures fading from bright reds to dull purples. His own hands, one normal, one clawed, glowed with the vibrant red of living warmth. But the light. Oh, the light. The hazy afternoon sun, which had been merely bright before, now stabbed into his eyes like needles. Leo squeezed them shut, but even through closed lids, he could sense the overwhelming thermal radiation. He stumbled blindly, hands over his face, until he found shadow beneath a collapsed overpass. In the relative darkness, he cautiously opened his eyes. The world resolved into thermal gradients. The cooler shadows were deep blues and purples. His own breath came out as a puff of warmer air, visible as a brief orange cloud. He could see the residual heat where he'd walked, faint footprints of warmth slowly dissipating. His mutated eyes, thermal sensitive, his mind supplied, were painfully sensitive to direct light but incredibly detailed in shadows. He examined his claw hand in this new vision. The bony claws showed as cooler than his living tissue, almost white against the red of his hand. The wound on his calf still glowed with inflammation, but as he watched, the heat signature began to diminish. The consumption had healed him, at least partially. The trade was this new mutation, this painful sensitivity. Leo spent what remained of the afternoon learning to use his thermal vision. He discovered he could distinguish between materials by their heat retention, metal cooled faster than stone, which cooled faster than wood. He found a cache of canned goods in a collapsed basement by spotting the slight temperature difference between the cans and the surrounding rubble. The labels were faded to illegibility, but when he pried one open with his claws, the contents were edible if bland. As the sun dipped below the ruined skyline, the world transformed. The thermal gradients shifted, with previously warm surfaces cooling rapidly. Leo's eyes adjusted, the pain from direct sunlight fading with the twilight. His thermal vision became sharper in the growing darkness, revealing details invisible to normal sight. He was moving through a canyon of broken buildings when he saw it. At first, it was just a heat signature, a humanoid shape, taller than a man, standing perfectly still in the shadows of a collapsed office tower. Leo froze, his breath catching. The shape glowed with a steady, ominous heat, brighter than any human he'd seen. It didn't move, but Leo could see the subtle pulsations of warmth indicating life. Then it shifted. Just a slight turn of what might have been a head. Leo remained motionless, hoping his own heat signature would blend with the cooling rubble. The creature took a step forward, its movement silent in the thermal vision. It was stalking, moving with predatory patience. Leo slowly backed away, each step carefully placed to avoid noise. His thermal eyes tracked the creature as it emerged fully from the shadows. The details resolved, a bipedal form with elongated limbs, a heat signature concentrated in its chest and head, and strange cold spots along its arms that might have been natural armor or weapons. It was following him, matching his retreat with its advance, closing the distance with terrifying inevitability. Night had fallen completely now. In the absolute darkness, Leo's world was painted in gradients of heat. The creature's glowing form was the brightest thing in the ruins, a beacon of imminent threat. It paused, its head tilting as if listening. Leo didn't breathe, didn't move. The only sound was the distant wind through broken windows, and the only light was the heat glowing from the monster that had him in its sights. The monster's heat signature pulsed in Leo's vision like a diseased heart, a sickly orange-red glow that bled through the darkness of the ruined building. His thermal-sensitive eyes, still raw and aching from their sudden transformation, painted the world in gradients of temperature, cold stone walls in deep blues, lingering warmth from the day's sun in fading yellows, and that pulsing, predatory orange moving through the rubble ahead. Leo crouched behind a collapsed concrete slab, his breath coming in shallow gasps that misted cold in his thermal sight. The claw hand, his left hand with its elongated bony fingers, twitched at his side, the new muscles and tendons still feeling foreign, like someone else's limb grafted onto his body. He could feel every scrape of the claws against the rough concrete, every throb from the wound on his calf where the insect had bitten him earlier. The pain was a dull, constant companion, but the hunger was worse. The Soul Eater's Cursed Maw, that unnatural ability born from consuming the demon lord's heart, gnawed at his insides with a craving that went beyond mere starvation. It wanted what the monster had. The creature moved with a disturbing, loping gait. Through the thermal overlay, Leo could see its humanoid shape, taller than a man, with elongated limbs that ended in clawed hands not unlike his own. But where his mutation felt like a crude hack job of bone and flesh, this thing moved with a terrible grace. Its head swiveled, scanning the darkness with senses Leo couldn't comprehend. Then it stopped, and Leo saw the heat in its throat gather into a brighter, more intense concentration. He barely had time to throw himself sideways before a glob of something sizzled through the air where his head had been. It struck the concrete slab behind him with a hiss that sent acrid smoke curling upward in his thermal vision, a plume of intense heat against the cooler stone. Acid. The realization chilled him even as his eyes tracked the temperature differential. The monster had acidic spit. Of course it did. Because why would anything in this godforsaken world be simple? Another glob followed, and Leo scrambled backward, his boots scraping against broken glass and twisted rebar. The thermal vision showed him the acid's trajectory as a streaking line of heat, allowing him to dodge at the last second. But he was being herded, cornered into a section of the collapsed building where the walls had fallen inward to create a makeshift cage of debris. The monster knew it. Leo could see the predatory satisfaction in the way its heat signature flared brighter as it advanced. He backed against a wall, his claw hand raised defensively. The monster loomed at the entrance to his makeshift prison, its form blotting out the faint starlight from outside. In the thermal spectrum, it was a masterpiece of nightmare biology, overdeveloped muscles glowing with metabolic heat, a distended jaw that housed whatever gland produced that corrosive fluid, and eyes that were cold pits in the warmth of its face. It spat again. Leo ducked, feeling the acid splash against the wall above his head. The stone sizzled and popped, droplets raining down to burn tiny holes in his scavenged jacket. He could smell his own singed hair. Panic clawed at his throat, but the Cursed Maw's hunger rose to meet it, a competing instinct that screamed at him to fight, to consume, to take what this thing had and make it his own. When the monster lunged, Leo didn't think, he reacted. His thermal vision showed him the heat of its muscles coiling, the shift in its center of gravity a fraction before it moved. He sidestepped, his claw hand shooting out to grab its extended arm. The bony claws dug deep into flesh that felt tougher than it should have, like punching through leather wrapped around steel cable. The monster roared, a sound that vibrated through Leo's bones, and tried to pull away. Leo held on, his own mutated strength surprising him. The claws weren't just for show, they anchored him to the creature, their curved tips hooking into muscle and tendon. The monster thrashed, its free hand swinging in a wild arc that Leo barely avoided by twisting his body. He could feel the strain in his shoulder, the new muscles in his claw hand burning with the effort of maintaining his grip. They stumbled together through the rubble, a grotesque dance illuminated only in Leo's thermal sight. The monster tried to bring its head around to spit acid at point-blank range, but Leo shoved his free hand, his still human right hand, against its throat, forcing its head back. For a moment, they were locked in a desperate stalemate, heat signatures blending where their bodies pressed together. Then the monster did something Leo didn't expect. It stopped struggling and went limp, just for a heartbeat. In that moment of deceptive calm, its tail, a appendage Leo hadn't even noticed in the thermal chaos, whipped around from behind and struck him across the back. The impact drove the air from Leo's lungs. He felt something crack, and white-hot pain blossomed across his spine. His grip on the monster's arm faltered, and the creature tore free, leaving deep gouges in its flesh that wept hot blood in Leo's vision. Leo collapsed to his knees, gasping. The pain in his back was excruciating, a sharp, stabbing sensation that made every breath agony. Through tear-blurred thermal sight, he saw the monster circling him, its heat signature pulsing with what looked like triumph. It knew he was hurt. It knew it had won. The Cursed Maw screamed inside him. Not with words, but with pure, ravenous need. It wanted that heat, that strength, that terrible adaptation. Leo looked at his claw hand, at the monster's blood still dripping from the bony tips. He looked at the creature, at the way it moved with a confidence born of being the apex predator in this ruined place. No. Not anymore. When the monster lunged for the kill, Leo didn't try to dodge. Instead, he met it head-on, his claw hand driving upward in a desperate, brutal strike. The bony claws punched through the softer flesh of its abdomen, and Leo twisted, tearing upward through muscle and organ. Hot blood, so hot it nearly blinded him in thermal vision, gushed over his hand and arm. The monster convulsed, its acidic spit dribbling harmlessly from its mouth as its body went into shock. Leo didn't wait. He tore his hand free and, driven by the Cursed Maw's insistent hunger, bit into the wound he'd created. His teeth, still normal, human teeth, ripped through flesh, and he swallowed without chewing, the coppery taste of monster blood filling his mouth. Power flooded him. It was different from the insect, different from the demon lord's heart. This was raw, animal strength, a primal vitality that burned through his veins like fire. The Soul Eater's Cursed Maw drank it in greedily, and Leo felt the familiar surge that meant a level up. Then came the cost. The mutation began at the sight of the monster's tail strike, his back, where the pain had been sharpest. It started as an itching sensation, then a burning, as if his skin were being cooked from the inside. Leo screamed, collapsing fully to the ground as his back arched involuntarily. Through the agony, he could feel his skin thickening, hardening, forming into overlapping plates that clicked and scraped against each other as they grew. It took minutes that felt like hours. When it was over, Leo lay panting in the rubble, the monster's corpse cooling beside him. His back felt heavy, constrained. He reached around with his human hand and felt not skin, but something hard and scaly, like armor plating grafted directly onto his spine and shoulders. When he tried to sit up, the new plates resisted, limiting his flexibility. He could move, but not with the same range of motion he'd had before. Defense at the cost of mobility. Another trade in the cursed economy of his existence. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements stiff and awkward. The thermal vision showed him the monster's body cooling from orange to yellow to blue. His own heat signature flared brightly where the new armor plates had formed, they retained heat differently than his normal skin. Another thing to learn, another adaptation to make. Dawn was approaching. Leo could see it in the way the ruins began to warm, the stone absorbing the first faint hints of sunlight. He stumbled out of the collapsed building, his sensitive eyes already beginning to ache at the increasing light. The thermal vision, so useful in darkness, was becoming a liability as the world warmed around him. Then the sun crested the horizon. Pain exploded behind Leo's eyes, a white-hot agony that drove him to his knees. His thermal-sensitive vision, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of sunlight, flared into blinding whiteness. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the light penetrated his eyelids, painting his world in searing brightness. He could see nothing but pain. As he knelt there, blind and helpless, he heard them. Distant voices, carried on the morning breeze. Human voices. Tracks lead this way. Fresh kill back there, something big. Mara wants any mutants brought in alive if possible. Leo's blood ran cold. Mara. The scavenger party leader who'd branded him a freak. They were here. They were close. And he was blind, armored in a way that made him slow, trapped in a body that kept betraying him with every level he gained. The voices grew closer. The morning sun burned through the haze of the wasteland, casting long shadows across the collapsed concrete and twisted rebar where Leo crouched. His thermal vision had mercifully faded with the dawn's full light, but the afterimage of pain lingered behind his eyelids, a searing reminder of his body's betrayal. He kept his left hand, now permanently twisted into bony claws, tucked beneath the tattered remains of his scavenger coat. The patchy scales on his back itched where they pressed against the fabric, each movement a stiff reminder of his limited flexibility. Voices cut through the silence, sharp and practiced. Leo froze, his breath catching in his throat. 3 figures emerged from behind a rusted shipping container, their movements economical and wary. They wore scavenged armor, leather reinforced with metal plates, and carried an assortment of weapons, a modified rifle, a machete, and what looked like a jury-rigged shock baton. The leader was a woman with close-cropped dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd survived too many close calls to count. Leo recognized her type immediately, the ruthless pragmatism of wasteland scavengers who trade their own mother for a day's ration. Behind her, 2 men fanned out, their gazes sweeping the ruins for threats. One was tall and lean with a scar across his jawline, the other shorter, stockier, with hands that looked like they could crush stone. Well, the woman said, her voice carrying easily across the 20 meters between them. Looks like we've got company. Leo remained still, calculating. His claw hand was hidden, but the scales on his back might be visible if they looked closely. The thermal vision mutation had left his eyes bloodshot and sensitive, but in the daylight, they'd pass for exhaustion. Maybe. Don't be shy, the woman continued, taking a step closer. Her companions mirrored her movement, maintaining their flanking positions. We're not here to start trouble. Name's Mara. This is Kale, she jerked her head toward the tall man, and Jax. The stocky one nodded once, his expression unreadable. Leo slowly rose from his crouch, keeping his movements deliberate. Leo, he said, his voice rough from disuse. Just passing through. Mara's eyes narrowed slightly. Passing through to where? This sector's been picked clean for weeks. Just, moving, Leo said, his mind racing. He needed to disengage, but showing fear would make him a target. Scavengers respected strength, or at least the appearance of it. To his surprise, Mara's expression softened marginally. Look, we're not looking for a fight. Actually, we could use some intel. There's talk of military activity north of here, soldiers looting something big. You see anything unusual? Leo's pulse quickened. They were asking about the Demon Lord incident. He shook his head. Just monsters. The usual. Mara studied him for a long moment, then reached into a pouch at her belt. She pulled out a wrapped protein bar, the kind scavengers traded like currency. Hungry? We've got food to spare for useful information. The sight of the bar made Leo's stomach clench with remembered hunger. Days of surviving on insects and whatever scraps he could find had left him perpetually empty. But accepting food meant engaging further, and every second increased the risk of his mutations being discovered. Before he could respond, a familiar warmth bloomed in his chest, a sensation he'd come to dread. It started as a tingling in his sternum, then spread like liquid fire through his veins. Residual energy from the humanoid monster he'd consumed yesterday, he realized with mounting panic. The Soul Leader's Cursed Maw was processing the last of the genetic material, and it was triggering another level up. No, Leo whispered, but the word was lost in the sudden agony that seized his right arm. Bone cracked audibly, the sound like snapping timber. Leo cried out, collapsing to one knee as his arm contorted against his will. The flesh from elbow to wrist bulged grotesquely, skin stretching taut before splitting in a spray of blood and clear fluid. Beneath the tearing tissue, something dark and chitinous pushed its way to the surface, glistening wetly in the sunlight. The scavengers recoiled, weapons coming up instantly. What the hell? Jax barked, taking a step back. Mara's eyes widened, her earlier casual demeanor vanishing. Mutant, she spat, the word dripping with venom. Leo couldn't answer. His world had narrowed to the transformation consuming his limb. The new structure elongated, hardening into a curved blade of midnight black chitin that extended from what had been his forearm. Joints reformed with painful precision, locking into place with audible clicks. Where his hand had been, there was now a scythe-like appendage nearly a meter long, its edge gleaming with unnatural sharpness. The pain receded as quickly as it had come, leaving Leo panting on the ground, his new arm, no, his new weapon, resting awkwardly against the rubble. He stared at it, horror and fascination warring in his mind. The chitin felt cold and alien, yet connected to his nervous system. He could feel the texture of the ground through it, could flex the muscles that controlled its movement. Don't move. Mara shouted, her rifle leveled at Leo's head. Kale, Jax, containment protocol. The two men moved with practiced efficiency, circling to either side. Kale's machete gleamed in the sunlight, while Jax activated his shock baton, blue electricity crackling along its length. Leo's mind raced through options. Run. With his back scales limiting movement and this new thing throwing off his balance, he'd be cut down before he took 3 steps. Fight? Against 3 experienced scavengers. Madness. Then he looked at his sidearm again. Really looked at it. The edge wasn't just sharp, it looked like it could slice through reinforced steel. And the scavengers, they were afraid. He could see it in their eyes, in the slight tremor in Mara's rifle. Slowly, deliberately, Leo pushed himself to his feet. The movement was awkward, his body still adjusting to the new weight distribution. He raised his sidearm, the gesture unintentionally threatening as the blade caught the light. Stay back, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Mara's finger tightened on the trigger. Last warning, freak. Leo took a step forward, his sidearm sweeping in a slow arc. The motion was instinctive, the blade humming through the air with lethal grace. It passed within centimeters of a rusted steel beam, and sheared clean through it. The cut section toppled with a crash that echoed through the ruins. All 3 scavengers froze, their weapons wavering. They'd seen mutants before, Wasteland was full of them, but nothing like this. Nothing that could cut through solid steel like paper. Let me leave, Leo said, putting every ounce of conviction he could muster into the words. I don't want to fight you. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Mara's rifle lowered a fraction. You're a monster, she said, the words flat and final. A walking abomination. Maybe, Leo admitted. But I'm leaving. Now. He began backing away, keeping his sidearm between himself and the scavengers. Every step was a gamble, if they called his bluff, if they realized how vulnerable he truly was with this unfamiliar limb and stiff back. Mara watched him, her expression unreadable. Then she made a subtle gesture with her free hand. Kale and Jax relaxed their stances, though their weapons remained ready. Go, Mara said quietly. Before I change my mind. Leo didn't need to be told twice. He turned and began moving through the ruins, his gait uneven as he learned to compensate for the sidearm's weight. Every few steps, he glanced back, expecting a bullet or a thrown knife. None came. When he'd put about 50 meters between them, hidden by the skeleton of a collapsed building, he allowed himself to breathe. The adrenaline crash left him trembling, his new arm feeling both alien and intimately part of him. He examined it more closely, the chitin was segmented like insect armor, with subtle ridges that probably provided structural strength. When he flexed, the blade moved with surprising precision, almost like a burst of static cut through his thoughts, followed by Mara's voice, distorted by radio transmission but unmistakable. Priority target confirmed. Male, early 20s, multiple visible mutations including chitinous right arm blade. Last seen Sector 7, moving east. Bounty classification, Alpha. Warlord wants specimens like this alive for study. Repeat, alive for study. Leo's blood ran cold. He pressed himself against the crumbling concrete, listening as the radio crackled with acknowledgments, at least 3 different voices responding to Mara's call. Bounty hunters. The local warlords people. And they wanted him alive. For study. The scythe arms suddenly felt less like a weapon and more like a brand marking him for capture. Leo looked down at his mutated limb, then back in the direction he'd come. Mara and her scavengers were already gone, vanished into the ruins like they'd never been there. But their message had been sent. The hunt was on. And Leo had just become the most valuable prey in the wasteland. The sun beat down on the cracked earth like a hammer on an anvil, and Leo felt every strike through the scaly plates on his back. They had grown thicker overnight, forming irregular patches that chafed against his ragged shirt with each step. His right arm, the chitinous scythe, hung heavy at his side, its sharp edge catching the light in dangerous glints. He tried to wrap it in cloth torn from his pack, but the material kept snagging on the serrated ridges, and he'd given up, letting the grotesque appendage swing freely. It was a constant reminder of what he'd become, a walking collection of mismatched parts. Leo trudged north, away from the ruins where he'd encountered Mara and her scavengers. The wasteland stretched before him in a monotonous expanse of dust and rock, broken only by the skeletal remains of long-dead trees and the occasional rusted hulk of pre-collapse machinery. His thermal-sensitive eyes, though still painfully sensitive to direct sunlight, provided some relief in the shade of a crumbling overpass. He could see the faint heat signatures of small creatures burrowing underground, rodents or insects, maybe, but they were too quick to catch, and he lacked the energy to dig them out. Water was the first crisis. His canteen had run dry 2 days ago, and his throat felt like sandpaper. He tried licking condensation from metal scraps in the early morning, but it only made his tongue ache. Now, as midday approached, the heat intensified, shimmering off the ground in visible waves. Leo's mutated eyes watered, the thermal vision blurring the world into a haze of orange and red. He stumbled into the shadow of a collapsed billboard, its faded advertisement for some forgotten luxury now peeling in strips. Leaning against the cool metal, he closed his eyes, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in his gut. The Soul Leader's Cursed Maw was a relentless master. It demanded sustenance, not just for survival, but for the power it promised, and the mutations it inflicted. Leo could feel it like a second heartbeat, a low thrum in his chest that grew louder with each hour without food. He'd avoided consuming anything since the encounter with Mara, fearing another random transformation. But now, weakness made his limbs tremble, and the scythe arm felt like dead weight. He had to eat. Using his claw hand, the bony claws on his left hand still sharp and functional, he scraped at the hard-packed soil near the base of the billboard. The ground was dry and unyielding, but after minutes of digging, his claws hit something fibrous. A network of pale roots, thin as wires, spread through the earth. Leo pulled one free, holding it up to the light. It was twisted and knobby, with a faint purple hue that suggested mutation. In the old world, he might have hesitated, but now, starvation overrode caution. He brushed off the dirt and bit into the root. It tasted bitter, with an earthy tang that made his mouth pucker. As he chewed, he felt the familiar surge of energy, the Cursed Maw activating, absorbing the genetic potential of the mutated plant. It wasn't much, just a trickle compared to the monster flesh he'd consumed before, but it was enough. A notification flashed in his mind, not in words, but as a visceral sensation, level 5. And then the mutation hit. It started as a tingling in his tongue, a pins and needles sensation that spread rapidly. Leo gagged, dropping the root as his mouth flooded with a strange, metallic taste. His tongue thickened, elongating beyond his lips, its surface becoming rough and segmented like a caterpillar's body. He could feel new sensory nodes forming along its length, tiny receptors that pulsed with awareness. When he tried to pull it back into his mouth, it resisted, curling and uncurling with a will of its own. A prehensile, sensory organ, useful, perhaps, for tasting toxins or detecting chemicals, but grotesque in appearance. Leo stared at his reflection in a shard of broken glass nearby. His face was gaunt, eyes glowing faintly with thermal residue, and now this writhing, alien appendage hung from his mouth. He looked less human with every level. The psychological strain was immediate. Leo's breath came in short gasps as he fought down a wave of nausea. His body was no longer his own, it was a patchwork of stolen parts, each mutation a reminder of the curse he carried. He thought of Mara's words, monster, and felt them settle in his bones like truth. But survival demanded adaptation. He forced himself to focus, using the new tongue to taste the air. It detected traces of moisture to the east, and a faint acidic scent that might signal danger. With effort, he retracted the tongue, though it felt awkward and heavy in his mouth. Over the next few days, Leo learned to use his mutations in tandem. His thermal vision guided him to warm shelters at night, abandoned vehicles with residual engine heat, or shallow caves where geothermal activity lingered. During the day, he traveled in the early morning and late afternoon, when the light was less punishing. The claw hand proved invaluable for digging up more roots and grubs, though the pickings were slim. The scaly plates on his back provided some insulation against the cold nights, but they also made sleeping on hard ground an exercise in discomfort. The scythe arm, for all its intimidating appearance, was mostly a burden. He used it to cut through thick vegetation or pry open sealed containers, but its weight slowed him down. The wasteland offered little mercy. On the third day, a dust storm swept in, reducing visibility to zero and scouring his exposed skin raw. Leo huddled in the lee of a rusted tanker truck, his thermal vision useless in the swirling debris. He could hear the howl of the wind, and beneath it, the skittering of something large moving through the storm. When it passed, he found tracks, clawed, three-toed, that circled his shelter before heading north. He didn't wait to see what made them. By the fifth day, Leo's supplies were gone, and the Cursed Maw's hunger had become a constant ache. He'd avoided triggering another level, scavenging only enough to stave off collapse. But as he crossed a barren salt flat, the sky turned the color of bruised flesh, and a cold rain began to fall. It was acidic, stinging his skin and forcing him to seek cover in a half-buried drainage pipe. Shivering, he chewed on a leathery strip of dried fungus he'd found growing on a rock. It tasted like rot, but it quieted the hunger for a while. It was there, in the damp darkness of the pipe, that Leo heard the hum. At first, he thought it was the rain, or the wind whistling through the metal. But as he listened, the sound resolved into a steady, low-frequency vibration, felt more than heard. It thrummed through the ground, up through the soles of his worn boots. Curiosity warred with caution. Using his thermal vision, he scanned the pipe's interior, nothing but cool, damp concrete. But the hum grew stronger as he crawled toward the far end. Emerging into the fading light, Leo found himself at the edge of a shallow valley. And there, nestled against a rocky hillside, was the source of the hum, an abandoned research facility. It was a stark, utilitarian structure, all concrete and steel, with narrow windows boarded over and a main entrance sealed by heavy blast doors. Vines and corrosion crept up its walls, but the building stood intact, unlike the collapsed ruins around it. The hum emanated from within, a faint energy that made the air taste of ozone on Leo's mutated tongue. He could see no movement, no signs of life, but the doors were shut tight, and a faded emblem, a stylized helix inside a circle, was still visible above the entrance. Leo's heart quickened. This was it, the place hinted at in his goal, a potential source of knowledge about the demon lord's origins, maybe even a way to control his mutations. He approached cautiously, his scythe arm raised defensively. The doors didn't budge when he pushed, and there were no visible controls. But the hum persisted, a promise of secrets locked away. As night fell, his thermal vision revealed no heat signatures inside, just the cold, steady glow of dormant machinery. He settled against the wall, watching the stars appear in the sky, the facility's energy a silent companion in the wasteland dark. The heavy doors groaned as Leo pushed against them, his chitinous scythe arm scraping against rusted metal. The abandoned research facility loomed before him, its concrete walls stained with years of grime and strange, phosphorescent lichen that pulsed with a faint blue light. The air inside tasted of ozone and decay, thick with the scent of preserved chemicals and something else, something organic that made his soul eater's cursed maw twitch with involuntary hunger. He stepped cautiously into the main corridor, his thermal-sensitive eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The facility was a labyrinth of shattered glass, overturned equipment, and peeling warning signs. His mutated tongue unfurled from his mouth, the prehensile sensory organ tasting the air. It detected no immediate toxins, but there was a metallic tang that spoke of old blood and something sharper, like concentrated adrenaline. The tongue retracted with a wet sound that echoed in the silence, and Leo shuddered at the grotesque familiarity of the motion. To his left, a doorway led to what appeared to be an administrative office. Desks were overturned, papers scattered like skeletal leaves across the floor. Leo moved toward a filing cabinet that had been pried open, its contents spilling out. He knelt, his claw hand sifting through the documents. Most were water-damaged beyond recognition, but one folder remained intact, its label stamped with a faded emblem, Project Genesis. He opened it carefully, his breath catching as he read. The logs were handwritten in a precise, clinical script, detailing experiments on Subject 0, a creature referred to only as the progenitor. The entries spoke of genetic splicing, forced evolution, and attempts to create a being that could adapt to any environment. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs as he realized the descriptions matched the demon lord he had consumed. One passage stood out: the progenitor's cellular structure exhibits unprecedented regenerative capabilities, but consumption of its tissue triggers uncontrolled mutagenesis in non-compatible hosts. Stabilization attempts have failed. Leo's hands trembled. So this was the origin of his curse. The demon lord hadn't been born, it had been made. And he had eaten its heart, becoming another failed experiment in a long line of them. He stuffed the folder into a makeshift bag slung over his shoulder, the scaly armor plates on his back scraping against the fabric. Further down the corridor, he found a sealed laboratory. The door was reinforced steel, but a viewing window revealed rows of preservation tanks inside. Through the grime-streaked glass, Leo could make out shapes suspended in amber fluid, twisted limbs, segmented carapaces, and organs that pulsed with a faint, sickly light. These were monster specimens, preserved for study. His cursed maw ached with a deep, primal hunger, but he forced himself to focus. He needed to get inside. His sensory tongue extended again, probing the door's edges. It detected no electrical currents or chemical traps, but there was a mechanical lock system. Leo raised his scythe arm, the chitinous blade gleaming in the low light. With a careful, precise strike, he severed the locking mechanism. The door hissed open, releasing a wave of cold, sterile air. The lab was larger than it had appeared from outside. Preservation tanks lined the walls, each labeled with serial numbers and brief descriptions. Leo moved between them, his thermal vision picking up residual heat signatures from dormant machinery. One tank contained what looked like a hybrid of insect and reptile, its multiple eyes staring blankly through the fluid. Another held a mass of tentacles that twitched occasionally, as if dreaming. At the far end of the room, a smaller tank caught his attention. The label read, Subject Gamma 7, Enhanced Locomotor Adaptation. Inside floated a pair of dissected legs, their tendons exposed and artificially reinforced with biometallic fibers. Leo's hunger surged. This specimen was dead, preserved, but its genetic potential might still be intact. The Cursed Maw whispered promises of strength, of escape, of survival. He hesitated. Every level up brought another mutation, another piece of himself twisted into something unrecognizable. But he was trapped in a facility that might hold answers, hunted by bounty hunters, and surrounded by monsters. He needed every advantage he could get. With a grimace, Leo used his claw hand to crack open the tank's seal. Fluid spilled across the floor, smelling of formaldehyde and rot. He reached in, his fingers closing around one of the preserved legs. It was cold and rubbery to the touch. Bringing it to his mouth, he bit down, the Cursed Maw activating with a vicious glee. The taste was foul, like rancid meat and chemicals, but energy flooded his system. His body shuddered, muscles contracting as a level up triggered. Pain exploded in his legs. He collapsed to his knees, gasping as tendons in his calves and thighs writhed beneath the skin. They thickened, coiled, and reformed into spring-like structures that hummed with potential energy. Leo tried to stand, but his legs buckled, the new mutations making his gait unstable and unpredictable. He stumbled against a lab table, sending glass beakers crashing to the floor. For several minutes, he practiced moving, testing the limits of his transformed legs. With a cautious bend, he pushed off, and launched himself halfway across the room, slamming into a preservation tank with a dull thud. The impact rattled his teeth, but he was unharmed. The spring tendons allowed for enhanced jumping, but controlling them required precise balance. He could navigate the facility's vertical spaces more easily, but one misstep could send him careening into danger. As he regained his footing, Leo noticed a terminal flickering to life in the corner of the lab. Dusty monitors displayed fragmented data streams. He approached, his new legs making his steps bounce slightly. The terminal's keyboard was intact, and after a few tentative presses, a file directory appeared. Most entries were corrupted, but one was highlighted: Stabilization Protocol, Serum Alpha. Hope, sharp and desperate, cut through Leo's pain. He opened the file, scanning the text. It described a serum designed to halt uncontrolled mutagenesis by introducing a stabilizing agent derived from the progenitor's own DNA. The notes were incomplete, referencing a storage vault in the facility's lower levels, but the implications were clear. There might be a way to control his mutations, to stop the random transformations that were tearing him apart. Leo was still reading when the lights in the lab brightened abruptly. A harsh, automated voice echoed from hidden speakers: "Intruder detected. Security protocols engaged." Panic surged through him. He turned just as panels in the walls slid open, revealing turrets that swiveled to target him. Red laser sights danced across his chest, converging on the center of his torso. The turrets hummed with charging energy, and Leo knew he had seconds to react. His spring tendons coiled instinctively, but in the confined space of the lab, a jump could send him straight into a barrage of fire. The first turret fired, a projectile whistling past his ear and shattering a preservation tank behind him. Fluid and specimen parts spilled across the floor. Leo dove behind an overturned table, his mind racing. He had to get out, but the exit was across the room, covered by two more turrets. His mutations, the scythe arm, the claw hand, the spring legs, were tools, but in this moment, they felt like clumsy, grotesque burdens. Another projectile struck the table, splintering the wood. Leo peeked over the edge, his thermal vision tracking the turret's heat signatures. They were automated, predictable in their targeting patterns. If he timed it right, he could use his enhanced jump to clear the distance to the door. But one mistake would mean being shot in midair. He took a deep breath, his sensory tongue tasting the charged air. Then he moved. The laser bolt seared through Leo's left shoulder before he even registered the whine of charging energy. White-hot pain exploded through his nervous system, and he stumbled against a corroded metal console, his thermal-sensitive eyes flaring with the sudden heat signature of his own wound. 3 robotic drones hovered in the chamber ahead, their spherical bodies rotating with mechanical precision. Red targeting lasers painted dancing patterns across the laboratory floor, illuminating dust motes that swirled in the stale air. The facility's automated security system had adapted. These weren't the simple turrets from the specimen lab. These were hunters, their movements coordinated like a pack of mechanical predators. Leo's new legs trembled beneath him, the spring tendons coiled tight with nervous energy. He could feel the unstable power in them, like compressed steel springs waiting to release. When he'd first gained the mutation, he'd nearly launched himself into a ceiling beam while testing a simple jump. Now, with laser fire cutting through the air around him, control was a luxury he couldn't afford. Another bolt sizzled past his head, close enough that he felt the heat on his cheek. The drones were advancing, their movements synchronized to cut off his retreat. Leo's mind raced, calculating trajectories, escape routes, weaknesses. His thermal vision showed him the drones' heat signatures, cooler than living flesh, but with concentrated hot spots at their weapon ports and propulsion systems. He pushed off with his right leg, the spring tendon releasing with a force that sent him flying over a toppled examination table. The movement was too powerful, too uncontrolled. He overshot his intended landing spot, crashing into a shelving unit that collapsed under his weight. Glass vials shattered around him, their contents, long evaporated chemicals, releasing only the ghost of acrid odors. Pain lanced through his wounded shoulder as he rolled to his feet. Blood soaked through his scavenged jacket, warm and sticky. He could feel the wound pulsing with each heartbeat, a rhythmic reminder of his mortality. The Soul Leader's cursed maw stirred in his gut, that familiar hunger that had become both curse and salvation. It wanted to feed, to consume, to transform the pain into power. But there was nothing organic here. Just metal and plastic and the lingering dust of long-dead researchers. A drone descended toward him, its weapon port glowing with building energy. Leo raised his chitinous scythe arm, the black carapace gleaming under the emergency lights. The mutation had been terrifying when it first erupted from his flesh, a grotesque blade of living chitin that had replaced his right arm from the elbow down. Now, it felt like an extension of himself, the edge sharper than any steel he'd ever encountered. He swung. The scythe arm cut through the drone's chassis with a screech of tearing metal. Sparks erupted from severed wiring, and the machine dropped to the floor, its propulsion system sputtering out. But the victory was short-lived. The other two drones adjusted their tactics, splitting to attack from different angles. Leo tried to jump again, aiming for a ventilation shaft high on the wall. His spring-tendon legs launched him upward, but the wound in his shoulder threw off his balance. He clipped the edge of the shaft opening, tumbling back to the floor in a heap of flailing limbs. The impact drove the air from his lungs, and for a moment, he lay there gasping, watching the ceiling lights swim in his vision. Blood pooled beneath him. Too much blood. His thermal vision showed the heat leaving his body in spreading crimson patterns. The drones advanced, their targeting lasers converging on his prone form. Leo's mind flashed to the research logs he'd read, the notes about Project Genesis, about genetic incompatibility, about how his body was tearing itself apart with every mutation. Was this how it would end? Bleeding out on a laboratory floor while machines finished what his own power had started? Then his eyes fell on the disabled drone. From the torn chassis, a viscous green fluid leaked onto the floor. Organic coolant, the research logs had mentioned. The facility used bioengineered fluids to regulate temperature-sensitive experiments. It was alive, after a fashion. Genetically engineered algae suspended in nutrient-rich gel. The Soul Eater's cursed maw roared to life within him, a hunger so profound it eclipsed the pain of his wound. Leo crawled toward the broken machine, his left arm dragging uselessly, his right sidearm scraping against the concrete floor. The drones fired again, but their shots went wide as he moved erratically, driven by instinct more than thought. He reached the pooling coolant just as another laser bolt grazed his side. The smell hit him first, earthy and sweet, like rotting vegetation and synthetic sugars. Without hesitation, Leo plunged his face into the green fluid, the Soul Eater's cursed maw opening in a way that still felt unnatural, a distortion of his jaw and throat that allowed him to consume anything organic. The coolant tasted like chemical death and life intermingled. It slid down his throat, cold at first, then burning as his body began to process it. The power system activated immediately, recognizing the genetic potential in the bioengineered algae. Leo felt the familiar surge of energy coursing through his veins, the telltale sign of an impending level-up. But this time was different. The energy didn't concentrate in a limb or an organ. It spread through his entire circulatory system, burning through his blood vessels with feverish intensity. Leo screamed into the pooling coolant, his body convulsing as the mutation took hold. His thermal vision flared wildly, showing him his own internal heat spiking to dangerous levels. Level 7. The notification wasn't visual, he'd long since stopped seeing the phantom displays that had accompanied his first few mutations. Instead, he felt it in the way his blood changed. The bleeding from his shoulder slowed, then stopped entirely as his platelets multiplied at an impossible rate, forming clots in seconds rather than minutes. The wound sealed from the inside out, new tissue knitting together with frantic urgency. But the cost was immediate and brutal. As his blood gained rapid clotting properties, his body temperature plummeted. Violent chills racked his frame, his teeth chattering so hard he feared they might shatter. The fever came next, a burning heat that fought against the cold in alternating waves, leaving him sweating and shivering simultaneously. His thermal vision went haywire, showing him the world in conflicting temperature gradients that made his head pound. The drones closed in, sensing his vulnerability. Leo forced himself to stand, his body trembling with the conflicting sensations of his new mutation. The rapid clotting had saved him from bleeding out, but the side effects threatened to incapacitate him entirely. He focused on the heat signatures of the remaining drones, ignoring the chaotic temperature readings from his own body. When the first drone fired, Leo didn't jump. He dropped, letting the laser pass over his head as he swung his sidearm in a wide arc. The chitinous blade sheared through the drone's propulsion system, sending it crashing into a wall. The impact triggered some failsafe, and the machine exploded in a shower of sparks and metal fragments. The second drone adjusted, rising toward the ceiling to gain a better firing angle. Leo's spring-tendon legs coiled beneath him. This time, with the adrenaline of combat overriding the disorientation from his blood mutation, he calculated the jump more carefully. He launched himself upward, not at the drone, but at the ceiling above it. His scythe arm punched through a maintenance panel, and he hung there for a moment, suspended above the drone. Then he dropped, putting all his weight behind the downward strike. The chitinous blade pierced the drone's central processor, and the machine went dark, dropping to the floor with a finality that echoed in the suddenly silent chamber. Leo landed beside it, his legs absorbing the impact with their spring-like resilience. He stood there breathing heavily, the feverish chills still coursing through his body. His blood felt strange in his veins, thicker somehow, with a viscosity that made his heart work harder to pump it. But he was alive. The wound in his shoulder had closed completely, leaving only a puckered scar where the laser had struck. He looked down at his hands, the claw hand on his left, the scythe arm on his right. His tongue, prehensile and sensitive, tasted the air and detected the fading ozone from the laser fire. His legs hummed with stored kinetic energy. His back plates itched where they pressed against his clothing. His eyes showed him the world in heat signatures. And now his blood clotted at the slightest injury, saving him from bleeding out but leaving him feverish and chilled. Every part of him was becoming something else. Something other. Shaking off the lingering disorientation, Leo moved deeper into the facility. The signs pointed toward the stabilization serum lab, the one mentioned in the research files. The possibility of control, of halting the random mutagenesis that was rewriting his body piece by piece, drove him forward through corridors lined with empty offices and abandoned workstations. He found the lab at the end of a secured hallway. The door had been forced open long ago, the electronic lock smashed by something with tremendous strength. Inside, the room was a disaster of overturned equipment and shattered glass. A central workstation dominated the space, its screens dark and dusty. And there, on the workstation, sat an empty vial holder. Leo's heart sank. He approached slowly, his sensory tongue extending to taste the air around the station. Old scents, chemicals, sweat, fear. And something else. A metallic tang that reminded him of the warlords' bounty hunters who had pursued him after Mara reported him. He noticed a data pad beside the empty vial holder. Its screen was cracked, but when he touched it, a recorded message flickered to life. The image showed a man in scavenger's gear, his face obscured by a breathing mask, but his eyes hard and calculating. Behind him, Leo could make out the distinctive banners of the local warlords faction. If anyone finds this, the man's recorded voice said, static distorting the words slightly, know that the stabilization serum is gone. The last dose was taken by the warlord in the east. He's using it to control his own acquisitions. The man leaned closer to the recording device. He's building an army of stabilized mutants. And he'll pay well for any more he can find. The message ended, leaving Leo alone in the silent lab. The empty vial holder seemed to mock him, a promise of control now snatched away. The warlord had the serum. The same warlord whose bounty hunters were already hunting him. The same warlord who wanted mutants alive for study. Leo's new blood ran cold in his veins, the rapid clotting mutation suddenly feeling like a prison rather than a salvation. He had survived the drones, adapted to another grotesque transformation, and reached his goal. Only to find it had already been taken by the very threat hunting him. Outside the facility, the wasteland stretched endlessly. And somewhere to the east, a warlord was building an army with the very thing Leo needed to stop his body from tearing itself apart. The research facility doors hissed shut behind Leo with a finality that echoed through the empty corridors of his mind. He stood at the threshold, the wasteland wind whipping dust against his mutated form. His scaly armor plates rattled like dried leaves, while his prehensile tongue flicked out instinctively, tasting the air for toxins that weren't there, just the metallic tang of decay that permeated everything in this ruined world. He adjusted the makeshift pack slung over his shoulder, its contents scavenged from the facility, nutrient paste tubes, a cracked data tablet with partial maps, and the empty stabilization serum vial he kept as a bitter reminder. The vial felt heavier than it should, its weight pressing against his consciousness. The warlord had taken the last dose. The warlord was building an army of stabilized mutants. The words from the recorded message looped in his head, each repetition tightening the knot in his stomach. Find the warlord, he whispered to himself, the words rasping through his cursed maw. The organ pulsed faintly in his chest, a constant reminder of the hunger that never truly subsided. It demanded consumption, demanded growth, demanded the next mutation that would twist his body further from human. For 3 days, Leo traveled eastward as the data tablet's maps indicated. The terrain shifted from the relatively flat expanse around the research facility to jagged rock formations that rose like broken teeth from the earth. His thermal-sensitive eyes proved invaluable as the sun dipped below the horizon on the first night. Where normal vision would have seen only darkness, Leo perceived the world in gradients of heat, cool blues for the rocks, warmer yellows for the patches of resilient scrub, and occasional bright oranges where small creatures burrowed for warmth. He moved cautiously, his spring-tendon legs coiled with potential energy. The mutation had settled somewhat since the facility, the initial instability giving way to a tense readiness. He could feel the elastic fibers in his calves and thighs, taut as bowstrings waiting for release. When he needed to cross a particularly wide crevice on the second day, he crouched low, focused his weight, and sprang. The world blurred. Rock walls rushed past. For a heart-stopping moment, he was airborne, the wasteland stretching beneath him in a panorama of desolation. Then he landed on the far side, the impact shuddering through his legs. His rapid clotting blood surged in response to the minor abrasions on his palms where he'd caught himself, the mutation activating without conscious thought. The wound sealed within seconds, but the familiar feverish chills followed, a wave of heat that made sweat bead on his forehead, then a cold that set his teeth chattering. Control, he muttered through clenched teeth, leaning against a rock formation until the side effects passed. I need control. On the third day, the beasts found him. They emerged from a canyon as the midday sun beat down mercilessly. Leo saw them first through thermal vision, 3 large heat signatures moving with predatory coordination. As they drew closer, their forms resolved into creatures that might once have been wolves but had been reshaped by the same mutagenic forces that twisted everything in this world. Their hides were mottled with patches of chitinous plating, and their jaws hung open to reveal double rows of serrated teeth. One had spines running along its back that glistened with some viscous secretion. Leo's claw hand flexed instinctively, the bony protrusions extending from his left fingers with a series of sharp clicks. His right arm remained human for now, though the memory of it transforming into a chitinous scythe during the drone attack lingered in his muscles. He could feel the potential there, the genetic blueprint waiting to be activated by the next level up. The lead beast charged, moving with surprising speed for its size. Leo didn't have time to think, only react. He dropped into a crouch, his spring-tendon legs compressing, then launched himself not forward but upward. He cleared the beast's lunge by inches, landing on a rocky outcrop above it. The creature skidded in the dust below, confused by the sudden vertical movement. But the other 2 were already flanking him. One circled to his left, while the third, the one with the spine back, positioned itself to cut off any retreat. Leo's sensory tongue flicked out, tasting the air. He detected the acrid scent of the spine's secretion, recognizing it as some kind of paralytic agent from similar encounters in the past. Can't let that touch me, he thought, his mind racing through options. The beast to his left lunged. Leo brought up his claw hand, the bony protrusions meeting fur and flesh. He felt the impact shudder up his arm, heard the creature's yelp of pain as his claws dug deep. But the momentum carried them both off the outcrop. They tumbled to the ground in a cloud of dust, Leo landing on top. Before the beast could recover, he drove his claws into its throat, feeling the life pulse out of it. The Soul Eater's Cursed Maw activated immediately. A familiar hunger surged through him, demanding he consume the genetic potential before him. With no time for hesitation, and knowing he needed the energy, Leo tore into the creature's flesh with his teeth, the Cursed Maw working even as his human teeth did the mechanical work. Genetic information flooded his system, foreign DNA strands unraveling and integrating with his own. The level up hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled back from the corpse as the world seemed to tilt. His ears began to burn, the sensation starting as a mild itch deep in the auditory canals before escalating to a searing heat. He clapped his hands over them, but the pressure did nothing to stop the transformation. The cartilage reshaped itself, the internal structures reconfigured, and when the pain finally subsided, the world had changed. Sound exploded into his consciousness. The wind wasn't just wind anymore, it was a symphony of pressure differentials and microscopic turbulence. The scuttling of insects in nearby rocks became a cacophony of precise locations and movement patterns. And beneath it all, a high-frequency hum he'd never noticed before, the ultrasonic communications of the remaining 2 beasts as they coordinated their next attack. Leo's new ears could hear it all. Every frequency, every vibration. The overload was immediate and debilitating. He staggered, disoriented by the sonic assault. The beasts saw his weakness and pressed their advantage, moving in from both sides. Focus, he growled to himself, forcing his mind to filter the noise. Filter it out. He concentrated on the ultrasonic frequencies, the ones the beasts were using to communicate. By narrowing his attention to that specific range, the rest of the sonic chaos receded to background noise. He could hear their positioning, one preparing to charge from his right, the other circling to come from behind. When the charge came, Leo was ready. He didn't turn to face it. Instead, he listened to the precise footfalls, the shift in air pressure, the ultrasonic pulse that signaled the beast's commitment to the attack. At the last possible moment, he dropped and rolled, the creature's jaws snapping shut on empty air where his neck had been. As he came up from the roll, his chitinous scythe arm activated. The transformation was quicker now, more familiar. His right forearm split and reshaped, the chitinous plates extending into a curved, serrated blade that gleamed dully in the wasteland light. He swung in a wide arc, not at the beast that had charged, but at the one coming from behind, the one with the paralytic spines. The scythe arm connected with a wet thunk, shearing through chitin and flesh. The creature collapsed, its ultrasonic cries cutting off abruptly. The remaining beast hesitated, its communication frequencies shifting to something Leo's new ears interpreted as uncertainty, then fear. It turned and fled into the canyon. Leo let it go, his body trembling from the aftermath of combat and mutation. He looked down at the two corpses, then at his own mutated form, the claw hand dripping blood, the scythe arm already retracting back to something approximating human shape, the new ears that twitched at every sound. He was becoming more monster than man with every level up. The realization settled in his gut like cold stone. Forcing himself to move, Leo butchered the larger of the two corpses, taking strips of meat that would sustain him for another day. The Cursed Maw had already absorbed what genetic potential it could, but his human stomach still needed fuel. As he worked, his enhanced ears picked up distant sounds, the rumble of engines to the east, the occasional burst of radio static, the organized movement of many beings. He traveled more cautiously after that, using his thermal vision to avoid heat signatures and his ultrasonic hearing to detect patrols long before they came into visual range. The new mutation proved invaluable for avoiding ambushes, though in areas with heavy wind or geological activity, the sonic overload threatened to return. He learned to regulate it, to focus on specific frequency ranges like tuning a radio dial in his mind. On the 5th day since leaving the facility, the terrain began to show signs of human activity. Fences made of salvaged metal appeared, then warning signs with crude skull symbols. Patrol routes became visible as worn paths in the dust. And finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Leo crested a ridge and saw it. The warlords' outpost sprawled in the valley below, a fortress of scavenged materials and brutal architecture. Walls constructed from shipping containers and reinforced concrete formed a perimeter around a central compound where larger structures rose, a command tower topped with antenna arrays, barracks, and what looked like a processing facility with smokestacks belching dark plumes into the evening sky. But it was the guards that made Leo's breath catch. Patrolling the walls were figures that moved with unnatural grace, their forms twisted by mutations that had been stabilized, controlled. One had forearms that ended in massive pincers like a crustacean. Another moved on 4 legs despite having a human torso, each limb jointed in too many places. A third stood watch from a tower, its head elongated with compound eyes that glittered in the fading light. These weren't freaks like him, struggling with unpredictable transformations. These were soldiers whose mutations had been harnessed, weaponized. And moving among them were bounty hunters, humans in tactical gear, carrying weapons that gleamed with recent maintenance. They moved in pairs, checking credentials at the gates, examining cargo being brought in on battered trucks. One hunter paused to scan the perimeter with binoculars, the lenses sweeping across the ridge where Leo lay concealed. Leo flattened himself against the rock, his thermal vision showing the hunter as a bright orange silhouette against the cooling landscape. His new ears picked up the hunter's radio transmission, fragmented but clear enough, perimeter secure, no hostiles detected, warlord wants the eastern approach double-checked after sundown. The binoculars continued their sweep, passing over Leo's position once, twice. Then the hunter turned away, satisfied. Leo remained motionless long after the sun had fully set, watching the outpost come alive with artificial lights. Watchtowers activated powerful beams that swept the surrounding terrain. Mutated enforcers took up positions at strategic points. Bounty hunters conducted shift changes with military precision. Somewhere in that fortress was the warlord who had taken the last stabilization serum. Somewhere in that fortress might be answers about controlling the mutations. Somewhere in that fortress was an army being built from creatures like him, but perfected, mastered. The wind picked up, carrying with it the sounds of the outpost, shouted orders, machinery, and beneath it all, the low hum of generators powering the warlord's ambitions. Leo's sensory tongue flicked out, tasting the air. It carried the scent of fuel, of ozone from electrical systems, of too many bodies crowded together. And something else, the faint, metallic tang of blood from the processing facility's smokestacks. He would need to get inside. He would need to face whatever horrors the warlord had created. He would need to use every mutation, every grotesque adaptation, every cursed gift from the demon lord's heart. But for now, he watched. And planned. And felt the Soul Eater's Cursed Maw pulse with hunger at the genetic potential concentrated in the valley below. The outpost walls loomed like jagged teeth against the bruised twilight sky. Leo crouched in the shadow of a rusted vehicle carcass, his thermal-sensitive eyes scanning the perimeter. Heat signatures moved in predictable patterns, 2 human-shaped blobs patrolling the northern wall, another 3 clustered near the main gate. His newly mutated ears twitched, picking up the high-frequency squeaks of bats hunting insects overhead and the ultrasonic pings of security systems he couldn't see. The sounds threatened to overwhelm him, a cacophony of whispers and shrieks that made his temples throb, but he focused on the lower frequencies, the crunch of boots on gravel, the metallic clink of weapons, the murmur of distant conversation. He'd spent the last hour observing. The warlord's compound wasn't just fortified, it was a grotesque display of power. Monster parts hung from spikes along the walls, chitinous carapaces, leathery wings, clusters of glowing eyes preserved in jars. Some still dripped viscous fluids that steamed in the cooling night air. Between these trophies moved figures that made Leo's stomach clench. Stabilized mutants. Their mutations were clean, controlled, a soldier with crystalline growths along one arm that refracted torchlight, another with elongated legs that moved with unnatural grace. No twitching, no uncontrolled spasms, no feverish chills like the ones currently making Leo's teeth chatter despite the warm evening. He wrapped himself in tattered rags scavenged from a nearby ruin, covering his most obvious mutations. The claw hand was bound in cloth, the chitinous scythe arm hidden beneath layers of fabric that made his left side bulge unnaturally. He'd smeared dirt and ash over the scaly armor plates on his back, though they still created odd contours. His prehensile sensory tongue he kept coiled in his mouth, tasting the air cautiously, metals, rot, cooking meat from within the compound, and beneath it all, the chemical tang of preservatives used on monster parts. When the patrols synchronized their turn at the northwest corner, Leo moved. His spring tendon legs coiled, and he launched himself over the 15-foot wall in a single bound. The landing was awkward, his enhanced legs still buckled unpredictably, and he stumbled into the shadow of a storage shed, heart hammering against his ribs. He waited, listening. No alarm. No shouts. Just the continued rhythm of the outpost at night, guards exchanging bored greetings, the crackle of torches, the distant sound of laughter from what might have been a mess hall. The compound interior was a maze of prefabricated structures and repurposed ruins. Leo moved from shadow to shadow, his ultrasonic hearing warning him of approaching footsteps seconds before they rounded corners. He passed a workshop where the smell of chemicals and decaying flesh was strongest. Through a cracked door, he glimpsed dissected monster parts on steel tables, tools gleaming under harsh lights. 2 men in stained aprons worked, their conversation drifting out. Another shipment from the eastern dig site. Kale wants the carapaces processed by dawn. He's pushing too hard. The serum's running low, I heard. Don't let him hear you say that. You know what happens to complainers. Leo slipped past, his sensory tongue unfurling slightly to taste the air. It confirmed what he suspected, the warlord's name was Kale. Not just a title, but the same Kale from Mara's scavenger party, the tall one with the scarred jaw. The realization settled like cold lead in his gut. This wasn't just some random warlord, this was personal. He found the main compound building, a 2-story structure that might have been a municipal office before the world fell apart. Now it bristled with added fortifications, metal plating over windows, barbed wire along the roof, guards at every entrance. Leo circled to the rear where a service entrance stood slightly ajar, a sliver of yellow light spilling out. His claw hand flexed beneath its bindings. The lock was simple, just a bolt mechanism. He extended one bony claw, careful not to tear the cloth covering, and worked it into the gap. The click was barely audible. Inside, the corridor smelled of stale sweat and cooked grains. Leo's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten properly in days, surviving on whatever he could scavenge or kill. A side room appeared to be a kitchen, with pots simmering over a low fire. His sensory tongue tasted the air, meat stew, possibly rat or something leaner, but beneath the spices, a bitter note. Poison? Or just spoiled ingredients? He couldn't risk it. He moved on, hunger gnawing at him. The stress of infiltration was building. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound threatened exposure. His rapid clotting blood made his veins feel thick and sluggish, and the alternating fever and chills from the mutation's side effects returned with a vengeance. Sweat beaded on his forehead one moment, then cold tremors racked him the next. He leaned against a wall, breathing slowly, trying to calm the pounding in his chest. That's when it happened. A familiar, terrible sensation began at the base of his spine, a crawling, tearing feeling as if something were uncoiling inside him. Not now, he thought desperately. Not here. But the Soul Leader's Cursed Maw didn't care about timing or safety. The stress, the constant threat, the consumption of the mutated wolf days earlier, it had all been building toward another level up. He felt his bones shifting, vertebrae elongating and becoming more flexible. Something pushed against the skin of his lower back, and he bit down on a scream as a new appendage tore through his clothing and the rags he'd used to disguise himself. When the agony subsided, he reached back with trembling hands. His spine had mutated into a prehensile tail, about 3 feet long, covered in the same scaly texture as his back armor. It twitched independently of his will, curling and uncurling like a nervous serpent. Experimentally, he tried to control it. The tail responded, wrapping around a nearby pipe for support. It gave him better balance, counteracting the instability of his spring-tendon legs. But it was another mutation, another visible freakishness. And it had shredded his disguise along his lower back, exposing the new appendage and the scales beneath. He tore more cloth from his already ragged covering, trying to wrap the tail against his body, but it resisted, wanting to move freely. Finally, he settled for letting it hang loose beneath a longer section of cloth, hoping it would look like a strange belt or tool in the dim light. Level 9. The thought brought no joy, only dread. Each mutation made him less human, more monster. And in this place, monsters were either trophies on the wall or enslaved soldiers. He pressed onward, using his new tail for balance as he navigated a narrow staircase to the second floor. Here, the corridors were cleaner, with actual carpeting in places. Offices had been converted into living quarters or storage rooms. Leo's ultrasonic hearing picked up snores from behind one door, murmured conversation from another. He avoided them all, following the scent of preservatives and something else, a cold, sterile smell that reminded him of the research facility. At the end of the hall, double doors stood reinforced with steel bands. A vault. And from beneath the door, that sterile smell was strongest. This had to be where Kale kept the serum, and likely his most valuable monster parts. Leo approached, his sensory tongue tasting the air. No poison here, just chemicals and cold stone. He examined the lock, more complex than the service entrance, with multiple tumblers. His claw hand wouldn't be enough. He was considering using his chitinous scythe arm to force it when a voice cut through the silence. I know that walk. Leo froze. He knew that voice, harsh, mocking, unforgettable. He turned slowly. Mara stood at the other end of the corridor, flanked by 2 of Kale's stabilized mutant enforcers. She wasn't in scavenger rags anymore, she wore reinforced leathers with the warlords insignia, a stylized monster skull, on the shoulder. Her eyes narrowed as they traveled over his poorly concealed mutations, the bulge of the scythe arm, the odd texture of his back, the twitching tail barely hidden by cloth. Leo, she said, the name dripping with contempt. I heard rumors a freak was sniffing around our territory. Should have known it was you. Still mutating, I see. Kale will pay a fortune for a live specimen like you. One of the enforcers stepped forward, his mutation manifesting as bony spikes along his forearms. He's unstable. Look at him shaking. It was the chills from the rapid clotting blood, but Leo didn't correct him. His mind raced. The corridor was a dead end except for the vault doors behind him and the way Mara blocked. Windows along one side showed a courtyard below, a 20-foot drop onto packed earth. Take him alive if you can, Mara ordered. Kale wants to study the uncontrolled mutations. Might improve the serum. The enforcers moved in unison, their movements coordinated, practiced. Leo's spring tendon legs coiled instinctively. He could jump the gap, maybe reach the courtyard. But his tail twitched, adjusting his center of gravity, and he realized with a sudden, horrifying clarity that the new mutation might give him the balance he needed to make the leap without breaking his legs on landing. He backed toward the window, his claw hand tearing at the bindings, the chitinous scythe arm extending with a wet, cracking sound. Mara's eyes widened slightly, she hadn't seen that mutation before. Alarm, she shouted, her voice echoing down the corridor. Intruder in the main building. Klaxons began to blare, deafeningly loud. Leo's ultrasonic hearing screamed in protest, overloading with the noise. He staggered, and in that moment of distraction, the spiked enforcer lunged. Leo swung his scythe arm in a wide arc, forcing the man back, but the second enforcer came from the side, grabbing for his tail. The prehensile appendage reacted on its own, wrapping around the enforcer's wrist and yanking him off balance. Leo didn't wait. He turned, smashed the window with his scythe arm, and leaped. The spring tendon legs launched him into open air. For a heart-stopping second, he was falling too fast, the ground rushing up. Then his tail whipped around, counterbalancing, adjusting his posture. He hit the courtyard in a roll, the impact jarring but not bone-breaking. He came up on his feet, already running. But the courtyard wasn't empty. Torches flared to life around the perimeter. Guards emerged from doorways, weapons raised. Stabilized mutants dropped from the walls above, surrounding him. And from the main building, Mara appeared on a balcony overlooking the courtyard, her face illuminated by torchlight. Close the gates, she commanded. He doesn't leave this courtyard alive. Metal gates slammed shut at both ends of the space. Leo stood in the center, surrounded by maybe 20 armed figures, his mutations exposed for all to see, the claw hand, the scythe arm, the scaly back, the twitching tail, his eyes glowing faintly with thermal sensitivity. His rapid clotting blood already worked on scrapes from the landing, and his ultrasonic hearing picked up the subtle shifts of his enemies preparing to attack. Above, Mara smiled coldly. You should have died in the wastelands, freak. Now you'll die here, and every part of you will end up on Kale's dissection table. Leo's breath came in ragged gasps. The fever spiked, then the chills. His tail curled defensively around his legs. He had no exit. No cover. Just a circle of enemies and the certain knowledge that if he fell here, everything, the mutations, the suffering, the desperate hope for control, would have been for nothing. The courtyard air tasted of dust and desperation. Leo stood at its center, his back to a rusted water pump that hadn't flowed in years. Around him, Kale's enforcers formed a tightening circle, 5 stabilized mutants whose bodies showed none of the chaotic horror of his own transformations. Their modifications were clean, purposeful, reinforced limbs, armored plating, eyes that glowed with controlled bioluminescence. They moved with synchronized precision, a stark contrast to Leo's patchwork existence. Above them, on a balcony overlooking the courtyard, Kale watched with the detached curiosity of a collector examining a rare insect. In his left hand, he held the serum vial, a slender glass cylinder containing liquid that shimmered with impossible blue light even in the dim courtyard. The warlord's other hand rested on the balcony railing, fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the corroded metal. He'd grown since Leo last saw him with Mara's scavenger party. Not just in power, but in presence. The scar along his jaw seemed deeper, a permanent reminder of whatever had transformed him from scavenger to warlord. Mara stood beside Kale, her expression a mask of cold satisfaction. She leaned forward, her voice carrying across the courtyard with practiced projection. Look at you, Leo. A walking collection of mistakes. Her eyes tracked over his mutations, the chitinous scythe arm that had replaced his right forearm, the prehensile tail that twitched nervously behind him, the way his thermal-sensitive eyes glowed faintly in the shadowed courtyard. You should have died when you ate that heart. Would have been cleaner. The first enforcer lunged without warning. Leo's ultrasonic hearing caught the shift in air pressure a fraction of a second before the attack, the high-frequency warning screaming through his mutated ears. He dropped into a crouch, his spring tendon legs coiling beneath him. The Enforcer's fist, a mass of reinforced bone and synthetic fibers, smashed into the space where Leo's head had been, striking the water pump with a metallic clang that echoed through the courtyard. Leo pushed off. His legs uncoiled with explosive force, launching him over the Enforcer's head. For a moment, he hung in the air, the courtyard stretching beneath him, cracked concrete, patches of stubborn weeds pushing through fractures, the Enforcers looking up with expressions of mild surprise. Then gravity reclaimed him. He landed behind the circle, his tail whipping out to trip a second Enforcer who'd been moving to flank him. The appendage, a flexible extension of his mutated spine, wrapped around the mutant's ankle and pulled. The Enforcer stumbled, giving Leo the opening he needed. His scythe arm slashed downward, the chitinous blade cutting through reinforced muscle with a wet tearing sound. The Enforcer screamed, a raw, human sound that seemed out of place coming from a body so modified. Blood sprayed across Leo's face. Warm. Metallic. He could feel his soul eater's cursed maw activating almost against his will, the hunger rising from somewhere deep in his gut. The mutation wasn't just a power, it was a presence, a second consciousness that whispered of consumption and growth. Don't let him feed. Mara shouted from the balcony. Too late. Leo was already moving. He dropped to his knees beside the wounded Enforcer, his maw opening wider than any human mouth should. Teeth that weren't entirely his own, sharp, serrated things that had grown with one of his earlier mutations, sank into the Enforcer's shoulder. Flesh tore. Genetic potential flooded Leo's system, a rush of stolen life that burned through his veins like wildfire. The level up hit him like a physical blow. Level 10. The number flashed through his consciousness, followed immediately by the familiar, terrifying sensation of his body rewriting itself. This time, the change centered in his chest. His lungs expanded, the tissue transforming, alveoli reshaping into something new and alien. He could feel the organs stretching, membranes thickening, new structures forming that had no place in human anatomy. He stumbled back from the Enforcer's body, coughing violently. Each breath tasted wrong, sharper, chemical. Information flooded his newly mutated senses, the composition of the courtyard air, the trace toxins from decades of pollution, the biological signatures of every living thing around him. His lungs could now filter and process substances that would kill a normal human, but the adaptation came at a cost. Every inhalation triggered spasms in his diaphragm, painful contractions that made speaking impossible. Interesting, Kale murmured from above. He held up the serum vial, watching the blue liquid swirl. Each transformation more grotesque than the last. And you call this power? Leo tried to respond, but another coughing fit seized him. He doubled over, his tail lashing out defensively as two more Enforcers closed in. Through watering eyes, he saw Kale make a gesture, a simple flick of his wrist. Canisters dropped from the balcony, shattering on the courtyard concrete. Green gas billowed upward, spreading rapidly across the enclosed space. The Enforcers didn't retreat, their stabilized mutations apparently included resistance to whatever toxin Kale had deployed. Leo's new lungs saved him. Where the gas would have seared ordinary tissue, his mutated organs filtered the toxins, converting them into less harmful compounds that he exhaled in ragged, coughing breaths. But the process wasn't perfect. Residual chemicals burned in his throat, and the effort of filtration left him lightheaded, his vision swimming. He fought through the haze. Thermal vision activated, cutting through the green gas to show him the Enforcers as heat signatures, blobs of orange and yellow moving with lethal intent. One approached from his left, another from the right. Leo calculated distances, angles. His spring tendon legs coiled again. This jump wasn't vertical. He launched himself diagonally, scythe arm extended. The chitinous blade caught the first Enforcer across the chest, slicing through armor plating that should have been impervious. The mutant staggered back, shock registering on features that were still mostly human. Leo landed, pivoted, used his tail to sweep the Enforcer's legs out from under him. The appendage had grown more responsive with use, an extension of his will rather than just another random mutation. But there were too many. A third Enforcer grabbed his tail, yanking hard. Pain shot up Leo's spine, white-hot and debilitating. He screamed, the sound distorted by his still coughing lungs. The enforcer swung him off his feet, slamming him into the courtyard wall. Plaster and ancient brick crumbled around the impact point. Leo tasted blood. His rapid clotting mutation activated immediately, sealing internal injuries before they could kill him. The feverish chills that always accompanied the ability washed over him, alternating waves of heat and cold that made his teeth chatter even as sweat poured down his face. From the balcony, Kale watched with growing impatience. "Enough of this," he said, his voice carrying through the gas-filled courtyard. "You're a fascinating specimen, Leo. A living record of uncontrolled evolution. But you're also a reminder of what happens when power isn't properly harnessed." The warlord raised the serum vial. For a moment, he seemed to study it, the way the blue liquid caught what little light filtered through the toxic haze. Then, with deliberate slowness, he removed the stopper. "No." Mara's cry was genuine surprise. "Kale, we agreed, the serum was for study. For replicating the stabilization process." "Plans change," Kale said calmly. He brought the vial to his lips and drank. The transformation was immediate and horrifying. Kale's body convulsed, muscles rippling beneath skin that suddenly seemed too tight. The serum didn't stabilize him, it unleashed something. Blue veins spread across his skin like lightning fractures, pulsing with inner light. His bones cracked audibly, lengthening, reshaping. Armor plates erupted from his shoulders and back, not the clean modifications of his enforcers but jagged, organic growths that looked more like monstrous scales than technological enhancements. Kale threw back his head and roared. The sound wasn't human, it was the cry of something that had shed its humanity entirely. His eyes glowed with the same blue as the serum, pupils elongating into vertical slits. When he looked down at Leo, there was no recognition in that gaze, only predatory hunger. The balcony railing shattered under his grip. Kale leaped, not with the controlled precision of Leo's spring tendon jumps, but with raw, terrifying power. He landed in the courtyard with an impact that cracked the concrete, sending shockwaves through the ground. The remaining enforcers backed away, their disciplined formations breaking as they faced their transformed master. Kale straightened to his full height, nearly 8 feet now, his body a hybrid nightmare of human and monster. The serum vial slipped from his fingers, shattering on the ground. The last drops of blue liquid soaked into the dust. "Now," Kale said, his voice layered with something deeper, something ancient and hungry. "Let's see what happens when controlled power meets your chaotic potential." He took a step forward. The courtyard seemed to shrink around them, the walls closing in. Leo pushed himself up from the rubble, every mutation in his body screaming warnings. His thermal vision showed Kale as a blazing inferno of heat. His ultrasonic hearing picked up the warlord's heartbeat, too fast, too strong, a drumbeat of impending violence. His new lungs filtered the last of the toxic gas, preparing for whatever came next. But for the first time since consuming the demon lord's heart, Leo felt something colder than fear. Something closer to certainty. However this ended, one of them wouldn't leave the courtyard alive. And the mutations, the horrible, unpredictable changes that had made him a monster in human eyes, were all he had to survive what Kale had become. The courtyard air tasted of ozone and blood. Kale stood before Leo, 8 feet of blue-veined muscle and armor plates that gleamed under the pale moonlight filtering through the compound's high walls. His eyes glowed with unnatural energy, the stabilization serum had transformed him into something both human and monster, every mutation controlled, every enhancement deliberate. Leo's own body screamed in protest. His lungs burned with each ragged breath, the toxic fume adaptation that had saved him from Kale's gas attack now causing violent coughing fits that racked his frame. The prehensile tail that had sprouted from his spine twitched nervously behind him, its flexible length scraping against cracked concrete. Across his back, scaly armor plates itched where they'd been torn by the mutant enforcer's claws. His left arm ended in a chitinous scythe blade that felt heavier by the second. "You should have stayed in the wastelands, freak," Kale's voice rumbled, deeper than Leo remembered from their brief encounter in Mara's scavenger party. The scarred jaw that had once marked him as just another desperate survivor now framed a mouth filled with serrated teeth. "Mara was right to turn you in. Unstable mutations like yours are a threat to everyone." From the balcony above, Mara watched silently. Her expression was unreadable in the shadows, but Leo could feel her gaze like a physical weight. The other scavengers, Jax with his crushing hands, the rest of the party, were nowhere to be seen. probably securing the compound or looting what remained of the warlord supplies. Leo was alone against Kale and whatever guards remained. Kale moved first. No warning, no dramatic charge, just sudden, terrifying speed. One moment he stood 20 feet away, the next his fist was crashing toward Leo's head. Leo barely raised his scythe arm in time, the impact sending shockwaves through his bones. He staggered back, his spring-tendon legs absorbing some of the force but not enough. Pain blossomed along his shoulder where the chitin met flesh. "Controlled mutations," Kale said, almost conversationally as he pressed the attack. His armored forearm deflected Leo's clumsy counterswipe. "That's what the serum gives. No random changes, no useless adaptations. Every enhancement serves a purpose." He demonstrated by flexing his fingers. Bone spikes erupted from his knuckles, sharp and precise. When he swung again, Leo had to throw himself sideways, the spikes tearing through the rags covering his torso instead of his throat. Blood welled from shallow cuts, but his rapid clotting mutation sealed them almost immediately, a small blessing in the growing storm of violence. Leo tried to use his thermal vision to predict Kale's movements, but the hybrid monster's body temperature was inconsistent, cool where the armor plates grew, blazing hot around the glowing eyes and blue-veined skin. The ultrasonic hearing that had served him so well during infiltration was now a cacophony of noise, Kale's pounding heartbeat, the distant shouts of guards, the skittering of insects in the courtyard's corners, even the faint hum of electricity from the compound's backup generators. Too much information, overwhelming his senses. "You're straining," Kale observed, landing a kick that sent Leo crashing into the courtyard's central fountain. Stone cracked under the impact, and stagnant water soaked through his clothes. "I can see it. Your body wasn't built for this. The Soul Eater's Maw gives power, but without control." He shook his head. "It's a curse, not a gift." Leo pushed himself up, coughing violently. Black-tinged phlegm splattered against the fountain's edge, residue from the toxic fume mutation. His tail wrapped around a broken pillar for support, its prehensile grip the only thing keeping him upright for a moment. He needed to think, to adapt. That's what he'd always done. Survived by using whatever grotesque change the curse threw at him. But Kale wasn't giving him time to think. The hybrid monster closed the distance again, this time with a series of calculated strikes. Left hook deflected by Leo's scythe arm. Right jab dodged by a spring-assisted leap backward. A sweeping kick that Leo avoided by using his tail to vault over Kale's leg. Each movement cost him, each evasion drained more of his dwindling stamina. "You're just delaying the inevitable," Kale said. He reached down and tore a chunk of stone from the fountain's edge. With a casual flick of his wrist, he hurled it. Leo's ultrasonic hearing gave him a split-second warning, he ducked, and the stone shattered against the wall behind him. But the distraction was enough. Kale was on him again, this time grabbing Leo by the throat with one massive hand. Armor plates dug into Leo's windpipe. He gasped, his claw hand scrabbling uselessly against Kale's wrist. The hybrid monster lifted him until his feet dangled above the ground. Up close, Leo could see the intricate patterns of blue veins pulsing beneath Kale's skin, could smell the chemical tang of the stabilization serum mixed with sweat and blood. "This ends now," Kale said, his glowing eyes boring into Leo's. "I'll deliver your body to the bounty hunters. Maybe they can study what went wrong with your mutations." Desperation clawed at Leo's mind. He couldn't breathe. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. His tail lashed out, wrapping around Kale's arm, but the hybrid monster didn't even seem to notice the pressure. The scythe arm was pinned between their bodies, useless. His other mutations, thermal vision, ultrasonic hearing, rapid clotting blood, none of them could save him from being crushed to death. Then he remembered the core of his curse. The Soul Eater's Cursed Maw. The ability to absorb genetic potential from any organic matter. With the last of his strength, Leo brought up his claw hand, not to attack Kale's arm, but to rake across the hybrid monster's chest. The bony claws tore through skin and muscle, drawing blood and something else, a chunk of mutated flesh, blue-veined and pulsing with unnatural energy. Before Kale could react, Leo shoved the flesh into his mouth. The taste was indescribable, chemical and metallic, like battery acid mixed with spoiled meat. He swallowed convulsively, feeling the substance burn its way down his throat. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. Pain unlike anything Leo had ever experienced tore through him. It started in his chest, a white-hot agony that made the previous mutations feel like mild discomfort. His heart, the original heart that had once beat in rhythm with the stolen demon lord's heart, was changing. He could feel it expanding, contracting in unnatural patterns, becoming something else entirely. Kale dropped him, stumbling back with a look of shock on his monstrous face. "What did you do?" he demanded, clutching the wound on his chest. The blue veins around it pulsed erratically. Leo couldn't answer. He was on his knees, hands pressed to his chest as his body convulsed. Energy crackled along his skin, visible arcs of blue-white electricity that jumped from his fingers to the wet concrete. The air filled with the smell of ozone and burning flesh. His thermal vision went haywire, showing his own body as a blazing inferno of heat concentrated in his chest. Level up. The thought came through the pain. Level 11. And the mutation. His heart was no longer just a pump for blood. He could feel it generating power, storing it, becoming a bioelectric generator nestled within his ribcage. With each beat, electricity surged through his veins, complementing his blood instead of replacing it. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating, like holding lightning in his chest. But the cost was immediate and brutal. As the mutation completed, Leo felt a massive chunk of his vitality drain away. It wasn't just fatigue or injury, it was something deeper, something fundamental. Years of his life, burned away in an instant to fuel this transformation. His skin grew paler, new lines appearing around his eyes. When he coughed, the phlegm was tinged with blood that didn't clot as quickly as it should have. "You fool," Kale whispered, understanding dawning in his glowing eyes. "You triggered another random mutation. And it's killing you." Leo pushed himself to his feet. Electricity still danced across his skin, but now it was controlled, channeled along the pathways of his body. He focused on his right hand, and a bolt of energy leaped from his fingertips to strike the fountain. Stone cracked and blackened where it hit. "Maybe," Leo rasped, his voice raw from the choking and the mutation. "But it's going to kill you first." He moved. Not with Kale's controlled precision, but with desperate, electric speed. The bioenergy enhanced his spring tendon legs, allowing him to cover the distance between them in a blur. Kale reacted, swinging with his bone-spiked fists, but Leo was already ducking under the blow. His prehensile tail shot out, not to attack, but to wrap around Kale's legs. The hybrid monster stumbled, caught off guard by the unconventional tactic. In that moment of imbalance, Leo discharged electricity directly into Kale's chest. The effect was immediate and devastating. Kale screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure agony. His body convulsed as the electrical current surged through him, disrupting the carefully balanced mutations granted by the serum. The blue veins beneath his skin flared bright, then began to darken. The glow in his eyes flickered and dimmed. "No!" Kale roared, trying to tear himself free. But Leo's tail held firm, and another shock kept him paralyzed. Now came the combination. The strategy Leo had been forced to develop through countless battles in the wastelands, using each grotesque mutation not as a standalone weapon, but as part of a horrifying whole. His tail restrained. His scythe arm rose, chitinous blade catching the moonlight. And his heart, his newly mutated, bioelectric heart, gathered power for one final discharge. He drove the scythe blade into Kale's chest, aiming for the same wound he'd torn open earlier. Chitin met mutated flesh and bone. At the same moment, Leo released all the stored energy in his heart directly through the blade. The resulting explosion of light and sound blinded Leo's thermal vision and deafened his ultrasonic hearing. Kale's scream cut off abruptly. The hybrid monster staggered back, the scythe arm tearing free from his chest in a spray of blood and strange, glowing fluid that might have been serum or something even more alien. For a moment, Kale stood there, looking down at the gaping hole in his chest. The glow had completely left his eyes. The blue veins had turned black and brittle. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only a trickle of blood emerged. Then he fell. Not dramatically, not with final words or a defiant gesture. Just collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut, landing in a heap of mutated flesh and armor plates that no longer gleamed. Silence descended on the courtyard. Leo stood over Kale's body, breathing heavily. Each breath hurt, his lungs still burned from the toxic fume mutation, and now his chest ached with the unfamiliar weight and rhythm of the bioelectric heart. He could feel it beating erratically, generating power with no outlet. Then he saw it. Clutched in Kale's hand, the serum vial. Not the one he'd drunk from earlier, but a smaller backup container, half full of glowing blue liquid. It must have been on his person during the fight. And now, as Kale's fingers relaxed in death, the vial slipped from his grasp. Time seemed to slow. Leo reached for it, his claw hand extending. His tail moved to cushion the fall. But he was too late, too drained from the fight and the massive health cost of the heart mutation. The vial hit the courtyard stones and shattered. Glowing blue serum spread across the concrete, mixing with blood and water from the broken fountain. The liquid seemed almost alive for a moment, bubbling and hissing as it reacted with the environment. Then it was just a stain, its potential forever lost. Leo stared at the shattered glass, a hollow feeling opening in his chest that had nothing to do with his new mutation. That serum could have been studied. Could have provided clues about controlling mutations. Could have been his chance at stability. Gone. As the thought settled in his mind, his bioelectric heart reacted to the spike of despair. It overloaded. The carefully channeled energy that had won the fight now surged through his body with no direction, no control. Blue-white electricity arced from his skin in wild patterns, striking the ground, the walls, the fountain. Pain returned, worse than during the mutation itself. His muscles locked. His vision tunneled. He tried to take a step, but his legs wouldn't obey. The courtyard tilted crazily. From the balcony, Mara finally moved. She leaned over the railing, her expression unreadable at this distance. Did she say something? Leo couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears and the crackle of electricity consuming him from within. His tail went limp. His scythe arm dropped to his side, the chitinous blade scraping against stone. One last cough racked his body, this one bringing up blood that was bright red and shockingly normal looking against all the mutations. Then his legs gave way. Leo collapsed beside Kale's body, convulsing as uncontrolled energy ravaged his system. Each spasm sent fresh jolts of agony through him. His thermal vision showed his own body temperature spiking dangerously. His ultrasonic hearing picked up the frantic, irregular beating of his bioelectric heart as it tried and failed to regulate the power it had been cursed to generate. Darkness crept in from the edges of his consciousness. The last thing he saw was the shattered serum vial, its glowing contents slowly fading as they soaked into the thirsty stones of the courtyard. The last thing he felt was the electricity burning through him, a final, cruel reminder that every victory with his cursed power came with a price. And then nothing. Electricity crackled through Leo's veins like 1,000 angry wasps. He lay sprawled on the blood-slicked courtyard stones, every muscle locked in agonizing spasms. His chest burned with a fire that had nothing to do with heat. It was the bioelectric heart, a furious generator of raw power that had saved his life moments before and now threatened to tear him apart from the inside. Each heartbeat sent another jolt through his system. His vision swam with afterimages of lightning blue arcs dancing across his retinas. The thermal-sensitive eyes he'd gained weeks ago showed the world in sickly heat gradients, the cooling corpse of Kale nearby glowed dull orange, the terrified enforcers around him blazed yellow with fear heat, and his own body shone white-hot with the storm contained within. He could feel the lifespan burning away. Not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible draining sensation, like sand pouring through an hourglass at triple speed. Every convulsion that racked his frame felt like years peeling away, leaving him hollow and brittle. Across the courtyard, Mara stood frozen on the balcony where she'd watched Kale's transformation and subsequent defeat. Her face, usually a mask of ruthless calculation, showed genuine uncertainty. The remaining enforcers, 3 stabilized mutants with various grafted monster parts and 2 human guards with energy rifles, formed a loose semicircle around Leo, weapons raised but not firing. "Don't approach." Mara's voice cut through the crackling air. That electricity could be contagious. One of the enforcers, a woman with chitinous plates covering half her face, took a hesitant step forward. Her clawed hand twitched toward Leo's prone form. "He's helpless, Mara. We can finish him now and collect the bounty." As if in response, Leo's body arched off the ground. Blue electricity arced from his chest to the metal buckles on his scavenged leather armor, then jumped to the wet stones beneath him. The enforcer stumbled back as a shock traveled up through the damp ground and into her boots. Leo gritted his teeth, tasting blood and ozone. His prehensile tail, the mutation he'd gained just hours before infiltrating this compound, lashed weakly against the stones. The scaly armor plates on his back scraped against the ground with each convulsion. He tried to focus past the pain, past the terrifying knowledge that his heart was literally killing him with every beat. Think, he commanded himself. The Soul Leader's Cursed Maw had given him this power, this curse. It had saved him from starvation, from monsters, from Kale. Now it would kill him if he didn't master it. He remembered the sensation of consuming Kale's mutated flesh. The rush of genetic potential flooding his system. The level-up notification that had flashed in his mind moments before his heart transformed. The system worked on consumption, organic matter, genetic material. But the mutations were random, unpredictable. Except, not entirely. During the fight with Kale, he'd used his mutations in combination. The prehensile tail to restrain. The scythe arm to strike. The toxic fume breathing to create cover. And finally, the electric heart to deliver the killing blow. They weren't just random body parts, they were tools. Horrifying, grotesque tools that fit together in ways he was only beginning to understand. Another shock ripped through him. This one traveled down his right arm, the chitinous scythe arm that had grown after consuming some mutated insect weeks ago. The blade-like extension glowed with blue energy, then discharged into the air with a deafening crack. The enforcers flinched. One of the human guards dropped his energy rifle, which sparked and died as residual electricity fried its circuits. Control, Leo thought desperately. He needed to control the flow. Not suppress it, that would be like trying to hold back a tsunami with his bare hands. But direct it. Channel it. He focused on his breathing. The toxic fume lungs expanded painfully, drawing in air that tasted of blood and ozone and the lingering chemical scent of Kale's destroyed stabilization serum. Each breath came with a hacking cough that shook his entire frame, but he forced himself to breathe rhythmically. In. Out. In. Out. With each exhale, he imagined the electricity flowing not randomly through his body, but along specific pathways. Down his arms. Through his tail. Into the ground where it could dissipate harmlessly. It wasn't working. The heart beat with its own furious rhythm, sending another massive jolt through his system. His thermal vision flared white, then black, then white again as his eyes struggled to process the energy overload. Then he remembered the ultrasonic hearing. The mutation that let him detect sounds beyond normal human range. He'd used it to infiltrate this compound, to avoid patrols. Now he focused on it, turning his attention inward. The sound of his own heartbeat filled his awareness, not the steady thump-thump of a normal heart, but a crackling, sizzling roar like a downed power line. Beneath that, he could hear the individual muscle fibers in his chest contracting and releasing. The blood rushing through arteries that felt too small for the energy they carried. He listened to the rhythm. Chaotic at first. Wild. Uncontrolled. But rhythms could be learned. Could be matched. Leo began to hum. A low, steady vibration in his throat. The prehensile sensory tongue, another mutation from weeks past, vibrated in time, sending feedback through his nervous system. He matched the hum to what he wanted his heartbeat to be. Steady. Controlled. Purposeful. Slowly, agonizingly, the random shocks began to coalesce. Instead of arcing wildly from his body, the electricity gathered in his chest, forming a contained storm. The convulsions lessened from full-body seizures to manageable tremors. He pushed himself up on one elbow. The movement sent fresh pain shooting through his system, but he didn't collapse. The bioelectric heart beat stronger now, but with direction. With intent. Mara's eyes widened. He's getting up. Should we fire? One of the guards asked, his voice trembling. Wait, Mara said, her calculating expression returning. She leaned over the balcony railing, studying Leo like a specimen under glass. Look at him. He's controlling it. Leo rose to his knees, then to his feet. The process took minutes that felt like hours. Each movement required conscious effort to keep the electricity contained. His thermal vision showed the enforcer's heat signatures shifting from fear yellow to cautious orange. Mara's remained a cool blue, calculating, assessing. You should have died, Mara said, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. Kale was enhanced. Stabilized. You're just, random. Random works, Leo managed through gritted teeth. The words came out raspy, his throat raw from coughing and electricity. As you can see. He took a step forward. The enforcers tightened their semicircle, but none attacked. They'd seen what happened to Kale. They'd seen the electricity. What do you want? Mara asked. The compound is yours if you want it. Kale's dead. The serum's destroyed. There's nothing here worth dying for. Research, Leo said. Another step. The spring tendon legs he'd gained months ago, his first useful mutation after the claw hand, tensed beneath him, ready to propel him forward or backward as needed. Kale was studying mutations. Stabilization. He had notes. Mara's expression didn't change, but Leo's ultrasonic hearing picked up the slight increase in her heart rate. The quickening of breath. She knew something. Why would I give you that? She asked. You're a freak. A danger. The bounty on your head would feed my crew for a year. Your crew is dead or scattered, Leo pointed out. He gestured with his scythe arm toward Kale's corpse. Jax ran when Kale transformed. The others fled during the fight. You're alone here, Mara. Just you and whatever loyalists Kale left behind. He glanced at the enforcers. Their heat signatures flickered with uncertainty. They'd served Kale for the stabilization serum, for protection. With him dead and the serum destroyed, their loyalty would be fragile. I could kill you all, Leo continued. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't threaten. Simply stated it as fact. The electricity isn't fully controlled, but I could release it. Burn out every piece of electronics in this compound. Fry every nervous system within 50 feet. He let a small arc of electricity dance between the fingers of his claw hand. The bony extensions glowed blue, casting eerie shadows across the courtyard. But I'm offering a truce, he said. Give me Kale's research. Everything he had on mutations, on the Demon Lord, on stabilization. In return, I leave. You keep the compound. You rebuild your power base without Kale breathing down your neck. Mara was silent for a long moment. Leo could see her mind working, weighing options. She was a survivor first, a leader second. She betrayed him to Kale because it was the safer play. Now the calculus had changed. And if the research points to a way to control your condition, she asked. You become even more dangerous. A threat I'd have to deal with eventually. Maybe, Leo admitted. Or maybe I learn to stabilize. To stop being a random freak. Then I'm no threat to anyone unless they come after me first. Another pause. The enforcer with the chitinous face plates shifted uncomfortably. Mara, we can't trust him. He's a monster. We're all monsters here, Mara said quietly. Her eyes never left Leo. Just different kinds. She made her decision. Leo saw it in the set of her shoulders, in the way her heat signature settled into a determined red. The research is in Kale's vault, she said. Third sublevel. Biometric lock keyed to his palm, but... She gestured to Kale's corpse. You have the tools to get past that. Leo nodded. He took another step toward the enforcers. They parted before him, creating a path to the main building. None made eye contact. None raised their weapons. The walk to the vault took what felt like an eternity. Every step sent fresh waves of pain through Leo's system. The bioelectric heart beat with ominous strength, each contraction burning another fraction of his lifespan. He could feel the years peeling away, could almost see his own mortality stretched thin and transparent. But he kept walking. Kept breathing. Kept the electricity contained. The vault door was massive steel, set into reinforced concrete. Kale's dead hand opened it with a sickening squelch when Leo pressed it to the scanner. Inside, the air smelled of chemicals and old paper. Kale's research filled 3 entire shelves. Notebooks. Data slates. Samples in preservation jars, monster parts, tissue samples, vials of various colored fluids. Leo's thermal vision showed some of them still faintly glowing with residual biological activity. He began gathering everything that looked relevant. His prehensile tail helped, curling around stacks of notebooks and lifting them into a makeshift sack made from a lab coat he found hanging nearby. The sensory tongue tasted the air, identifying chemical compounds he couldn't name but recognized as similar to what he'd smelled on Kale's stabilization serum. One notebook caught his eye. It lay open on a central table, as if Kale had been studying it recently. The page showed a detailed anatomical drawing of a heart, not human, but something larger, more complex, with multiple chambers and strange crystalline structures. Beneath it, in Kale's precise handwriting, Demon Lord cardiac analysis. Bioelectric generation confirmed. Stabilization requires harmonic resonance with base genetic template. Specimen shows. The writing cut off mid-sentence. Leo's own bioelectric heart gave a particularly strong beat, as if recognizing the diagram. Blue light leaked from between his ribs, illuminating the page. He took the notebook. Took all of them. When he emerged from the vault, Mara was waiting in the corridor outside. She'd come down from the balcony, leaving the enforcers in the courtyard. She held no weapon, but her posture was tense, ready. "Find what you needed?" she asked. "Enough," Leo said. The sack of research weighed heavily on his shoulder, both physically and metaphorically. "There are answers here. Or at least, better questions. And our truce?" "Honored," Leo said. "I'm leaving. The compound is yours. I suggest you leave too, before whatever monster Kale was working with comes looking for its master." Mara's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "Kale wasn't just studying mutations," Leo said. "He was harvesting them. From something big. Something old. The research mentions a primary source in the deep wastelands. I don't think it will be happy its harvesters have stopped delivering." He pushed past her, heading for the compound's main gate. His electric heart beat a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a countdown clock he could feel in his bones. Mara followed at a distance. Through the ruined gates, past the bodies of enforcers and guards who had fallen during his fight with Kale. The night air was cold, carrying the scent of blood and ozone and distant decay. They reached the edge of the compound, where the fortified walls gave way to the open wasteland. Leo paused, looking back at the place that had nearly been his tomb. "You could stay," Mara said quietly. "Help me rebuild. Your abilities would be useful." Leo shook his head. "I'm not a tool to be used, Mara. Not by you, not by Kale, not by anyone." "What are you, then?" He didn't have an answer. A freak? A monster? A man trying to survive? All of those, and none of them. Before he could respond, the ground trembled. It started as a faint vibration, barely noticeable. Then grew to a steady rumble that shook dust from the compound walls. Leo's ultrasonic hearing picked it up first, a deep, subsonic roar coming from the direction of the deep wastelands. From where Kale's research indicated the primary source was located. The sound built, rising through frequencies until it became audible to normal human ears. A roar that wasn't just sound, but pressure, vibration, primal threat. It echoed across the wasteland, shaking the very stones beneath their feet. Leo's thermal vision flared as something massive moved in the distance, a heat signature larger than any building, brighter than any fire, awakening from slumber or confinement or whatever state it had been in while Kale harvested its parts. Mara took an involuntary step back. "What in the hells is that?" "Kale's mistake," Leo said, his voice barely audible over the fading echo of the roar. "And our problem now?" He turned away from the compound, from Mara, from the temporary safety of walls and weapons. The research sack weighed on his shoulder. The bioelectric heart beat its painful rhythm. The mutations, all of them, from the claw hand to the prehensile tail to the scythe arm to the lungs that breathed poison and the eyes that saw heat and the ears that heard ultrasound, hummed with uneasy awareness. Somewhere out there in the dark was a monster that had supplied Kale with genetic material. A creature so powerful its very flesh could be harvested to create stabilized mutants. And it was awake. And angry. And Leo, with his unstable, random, ever-changing biology, would have to face it. Or be consumed by it. He took a step into the wasteland. Then another. The roar echoed again, farther away this time but no less threatening. A promise of battles to come. Of mutations yet to be gained. Of a power he still couldn't control, but was slowly, painfully learning to direct. The compound gates closed behind him with a final, metallic clang. Mara was gone, returned to her fortress of stone and fear. Leo was alone again. But not helpless. Never helpless again. He walked into the dark, the electric light of his heart casting blue shadows on the broken ground. The storm within him raged, but for now, he was its master. For now.